I had nobody. So if you had someone who could reach out and say, do you know what? I've done it. I've worked the shifts. I've done the locus protection. You know, I've looked at the dead bodies. I've dealt with the suicides. I've dealt with fatal road accidents. You know, I've dealt with it. I've been there. I've lived the life. And I know what it's like not to have enough sleep and still be expected to get up and deal with it. I've done all of that. So to have someone who understood that, so that I wouldn't have to explain what the role of a cop is, would have been amazing. I could have just forgotten about that part of it and just spoken about what I needed. I could have got the help I wanted.
You can get access to each episode's transcript with key learning points, timestamps and references if you get yourself onto my mailing list. Just go to the main website on policesciencedoctor.com, and on the bottom of each page you will find a sign-up form for notifications of new content. Just enter your first name, your preferred email address and the type of organization you work for. You will not get any spam. This is just for me to let you know about new content and for you to get access to all the transcripts.
So when you think about the level of stress that's put on a police officer, forget the fact that they're a human being and they've got a family and they've got a partner and they've got other things going on outside the job. Purely as a police officer, the level of stress that they are under on a daily basis is huge. And I just thought, you know, I've been there, I've done it, I've lived the life. I can go back and I can help them. If they need the help and they're willing to reach out to me, I'm reaching out to them. And I will offer the hand that was never offered to me. And I will help these people get through what they're getting through. That's what I do now.
Hello and welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to the Mental Health and Policing Conference by Police Science Doctor. I'm Suzanne Knaube-Nicole. I'll tell you a little bit about myself just briefly if you're not familiar with me, so you know why I'll be talking at you. I'm an investigative psychologist. I've got over 10 years experience of working in a variety of UK police forces in a variety of UK civilian police roles, including investigating, research, evidence-based policing, being a uniformed PCSO on London streets, and also interviewing suspects in the custody suite. I did an MSc and then a PhD in investigative psychology. My PhD was on behavioral analysis in major crime investigations, and I'm really interested in many of the things that we can cover in police science. Now, Police Science Doctor is a website I set up quite a while ago. It had 2 previous iterations. It was initially Dr. IPIP, then it became EBP Doctor, now it is Police Science Doctor. But all the content is the same. Basically, what I do is I take research findings that are being published within academic circles and that have really fantastic bits of information for the practitioner community, law enforcement officers, police, everyone working on the ground. And I take those research findings and I turn them into something that these officers can actually use, because they don't have access to academic research journals. They don't have the time to read them, and they're really boring to read. If you've ever tried to read an academic article, it can be painful. So I try and take these articles and I turn them into videos and a podcast and something that's a lot more accessible. You can watch the videos on my website. Some of them are interactive. You can watch the videos on YouTube, and they're all turned into podcasts as well. The other thing I do as Police Science Doctor is I interview people who have something very important and very interesting to share that I think will be of benefit to other law enforcement practitioners. So these are either practitioners like yourselves, or they are experts in their field, subject matter experts. I've had some really big names on. I'm going to have a lot more names on as well. And I'm actually developing a number of online courses with some of these big names, because their teaching can now be, put into something that is eternally lasting, and that can then be put out to the entire world rather than be taught in a classroom to maybe 12 people at a time. And another thing I do as Police Science Doctor is I browse through research articles and I extract golden snippets of information that are really practical, and I email them out to people on the email list, the free Police Science Doctor email list that you can join at any time. And every Tuesday you get an email from me in the inbox with 3 such golden nuggets of information. They're not theoretical, abstract bits of academic speak. They're really practical, hands-on, and something that I think you can use immediately. Right, where am I? So I've got my notes here on the side, which is why I'm going to be looking at that. I've given you the background to myself, and I'm going to introduce my co-host now. I'm not doing this on my own. So the lovely Jeannie McKenna, you actually saw her in the pre-roll video just now. She's a former police officer, and as you see now, I've interviewed her before. So she had a really, really bad time in policing, and she went through hell, and she nearly took her own life on more than one occasion. She worked through it in completely the wrong way. She did it all by herself, and it took her years to recover. Now what she's doing, she has left the police and she's become a qualified life coach. She's an accredited life coach, and she specializes in helping people with stress who work in frontline policing staff, police officers, former or current serving, whatever, anyone who needs her help. She's actually doing coaching, and we're developing a course, and that is going to be released later this month, and we'll be speaking about this course in the future. So may I have the lovely Jeannie McKenna with me on the screen, and she's going to give you a bit of information about who she is.
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you very much for that. That was quite an introduction. I don't know what else I can say. My name is Jeannie McKenna. I'm a former police officer. I did more than 21 years on the streets, both in England and in Scotland. I did 10 years as a road traffic police officer, so you can imagine the kind of things I saw, the kind of things I experienced, just like many of you have been there. And I suffered with my mental health. I contemplated suicide in my late 20s. More than half a lifetime ago, I'm afraid to say. But I'm still here, and I'm glad I am. But the mistake I made that I wouldn't want any of you to make is to go about getting yourself into the right place by doing it the wrong way. And I did all of that because there was no one there to help me. There was no one to reach out. I was offered, having contemplated suicide by alcohol and pills, I was offered by my GP yet more pills, which I didn't think was appropriate, fortunately. But there was no one there to help me. And so I did it totally alone, on my own. It took me years to get beyond the stress, the trauma, the issues with bullying that I'd encountered, the issues with prejudice, sexual discrimination, and that doesn't even include the things I saw, the people who'd hung themselves, the bad road accidents. My very first shift out in a car on my own as a beat officer, not even a traffic officer, I came across what turned out to be a double fatal. The people were still alive at the time, and I was having to manage that as a 21-year-old with no experience. Did I get any help after that? No. Was I even asked if I was okay? No. I'm really looking forward to today. I think you're going to get some fantastic shares from some fantastic people who are or have been police officers. And I think it's great that we're all reaching out now and talking to each other in terms of mental health. It's been an elephant in the room for so long. It's ridiculous. It really is. When you think that there's at least 450 million people in the world suffering with mental illness, and a frightening and alarming statistic is that 300 million of them are not seeking help. The police service is a reflection of society. But I don't think that's a reason not to change. I think the police can lead the way with this. I think it's time that the organisation stepped up and decided that, we want a healthy workforce. We've got a bunch of human beings here, not robots. They're the people that get the job done. They're more important than the buildings, than the cars, than the helicopters, than the guns, whatever else. Without the people in the organisation, the job doesn't get done. And those people deserve to be supported, deserve to be cared for. And society deserves to have a police service that is fit and healthy, that can help them. And for me, raising the awareness of mental health in policing is hugely important. It's hugely important that we get that help out there to people. The number of clients that I deal with who are police officers who are afraid to come forward to anyone who is still in the job or anyone associated with the job in terms of being employed by the police service. We need to get rid of this stigma. These people out here are being asked to do superhuman feats and do it on a daily basis. And yet we give them no support. We give them no training to deal with this. Yeah, for sure, we mention mental health because there are, things we need to do under the Mental Health Act, but we don't actually look at our own mental health and how we can support our colleagues. The organisation has not only a legal duty of care, but a moral obligation to these officers and members of police staff, because there isn't, other than the other emergency services and perhaps the military, there is no way you're going to get this level of stress and trauma thrown at you on a day-to-day basis. So for me, it's all about getting the message out there. Ultimately, I don't care where you go for the help. I am a life coach. I do help, police officers and police staff who are struggling to deal with their own challenges. But I actually don't care where you go, as long as you go somewhere and get that help and you build your resilience and you keep yourself fit and mentally healthy. I think that pretty much sums it up, Suzanne.
Thank you very much for that. Now, just in terms of housekeeping, so wherever you're watching this, you're either watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, can you just put into the comments or into the chat where you're from? I think that would be very interesting to see. And also, what I've noticed this week on my subscriber list and people registered for this webinar, somebody in West Midlands Police in the UK must have cracked the whip, because I had about 20 or 30 people sign up in the last 3 days. I would love to know who that is. I would love to know who's lit that fire under people's behinds, and I'd love to thank them. So if you're from the West Mids, just just raise your hand, just to say hello. We're from the West Mids, and this is who inspired us so very nicely to come to this conference. But I'm really glad you're here. So just put into the comments where you're from, and also if you've got a question, please start it with a Q. So we'll try and get to answer these questions as and when they come up after the video. So I'll explain how that works. But if the question starts with a Q, it'll be a lot easier for Anya, who's helping us in the background, to actually select them, put them on the screen, and then Jeannie and I can address that question. So as I mentioned before, Jeannie and I are actually working together on a course, and it's called the Emergency Stress Pit Stop course. If you imagine your race car, and as a police officer, you are a very expensive and very important race car, but once in a while you need to pull in, you need to have your oil checked, you need to have your tires checked, you need to have your brake pads checked. Everything needs to be done so you can get back into the race. So this course is something that does that. And actually, Ginny, you should be, for a minute, can you just tell people what they'll get from the course, because it's yours.
Yeah, for sure. It's about education. It's letting you understand what stress is, that it's actually a normal bodily function, which when you're in the middle of stress is not the thing you want to hear. But the reality is we can't get rid of stress. It's always going to be there. But it's about educating you about what stress is and how it can impact you both mentally, physically, behaviorally, emotionally. And then giving you the opportunity to explore your own triggers in terms of how stress impacts you, because we're all very different. We're all unique human beings, and the way we process and deal with things is totally different. So I think one of the things I often hear from my clients is that how come it's just me that's broken? None of my colleagues are broken. It must just be something that's wrong with me. The reality is we all process things differently. Are your colleagues actually being honest about how they've been impacted by it? Potentially not. Certainly, I never told anybody I was struggling until it all went horribly wrong and I couldn't cope anymore. So this course is about giving you that degree of self-awareness that you need. And then moving from there, we then start to look at some of the things that can impact you, like your own self-limiting beliefs that may have come from your cultural background, from your upbringing, from experiences that you've had previously. And then we go from there to change those self-limiting beliefs, to make you appreciate how they've been holding you back from being the very best that you can be and from being the healthiest person that you can be. And then we look at things like your core values. Is what you're doing, is your job, is your life working with what really matters with you? And I think the great thing about the course is when it's run at a pace that you can deal with. It's totally confidential. You can do it on your meal break on nights if that's what you want to do. It's whenever you want to do it. But what it does is it's an opportunity for you to take some time that fits around your lifestyle, where you can start to get that level of self-awareness. You can start to understand how it is that you tick in relation to the stress response. And then with that information, you're better able to cope with the things as they come along. You can recognize it earlier and think, oh, hang on a minute, there's something I need to do with this. And also within the program, there are solutions for you. There's how to get a better night's sleep. There's things about exercise and nutrition. What we want is a holistic approach to our life. And the more you take care of yourself, and it's important that you start to think about putting yourself in front of other people for a change, because as helpers, we don't do that. This course will allow you to take some of that time for you and to experience it and to improve your mental health. So if you're aware of what stress is, you're aware of how it affects you in all the different formats that it may come to you, and you understand that, your stress response is totally different to mine, it's totally different to Suzanne's or any of your colleagues. Even though you may have been to an identical incident, it doesn't matter. It's not about them, it's about you. And there's no weakness in knowing that you need some help. The great thing about this course is it's confidential, so you don't need to tell anybody unless you choose to. Now, it may be all you need just to get your finger on what it is that's making you tired or depressed, or maybe you're having a few rows with the other half, or whatever it may be. But it's going to give you information you didn't have. And the exercises that I've included are going to give you a greater self-awareness. In an ideal world, we should be teaching this stuff to kids. We're sent out into the world with no manual of how to be. We don't understand how our head works. We don't understand how our body works and how the two combine together. We don't get any of that. So this hopefully is an opportunity for you to get a little bit of that information and to be able to use that in a constructive way to keep you safe mentally and to keep you mentally well.
Well, like Jenny said, I think the important thing here is that no course, no training can stop you experiencing what you're going to experience as a police officer or law enforcement officer or, military, where, whatever you do. But this course is going to give you tools that you can use in the long term. It's not going to be, maybe pills will dampen the symptoms a little bit, but it gives you the tools so you can handle things like that over and over again, and it will be easier for you to do so. Is that right, Jenny?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Stress is there. It's not going away. With the greatest will in the world, we've evolved over the last couple of thousand years, and the stress response is identical. So, but the great thing about that, and once you understand the stress response, is that it doesn't know the difference between real or perceived danger. And that's actually a loophole, if you like, in the system that you can use to help you get better. And there's tons of information in there. And ultimately, for most people, it will be all they need. But if you need more than that, then there's information there how you can contact me about other coaching programs that I have, where I can work with as a group or I can work with you individually. But for the majority of people, this is going to be, the first place to start, and it may be all you need. I would highly recommend it because It's directed at you as a first responder, from someone who has been a first responder, and from someone who didn't have that help and didn't have that information to hand. You know what? It's an opportunity, because we all have a self-responsibility as well. As much as we're going to hear about the organisation and all that kind of thing in today's webinar, and that's really important that the organisation, you know, stand up and say we've got an obligation. We also have an obligation, both certainly in the UK, we have an obligation in law to protect ourselves, to protect our colleagues, but we also have a moral obligation. And unfortunately, as cops, because of what we do, we always put other people first, and we put ourselves as low down the list as we can get. The reality is sometimes you need to bring yourself back to the top, and you need to make sure that you're safe and that you're well and that you're healthy, so that you can continue to do the amazing job that you guys all do. And I'll be the first one. I did 21 years. Anybody else out there who's doing that now, you're amazing, truly.
Yeah, because you guys are needed so much, and you can only do your job well if you are well. So well said. So what was I going to say? All right, we're actually going to have a competition. So we're going to ask you a question towards the end of the webinar, and the first person to email me the correct answer is going to win Ginny's course for free. We're not going to announce the winner because we said this confidential, and you can either use the course yourself or you can give it to someone that you think needs it more. But we're going to get to that at the end. The other thing I forgot to say is that keep open a Word document or a Google document whilst you're watching this, because Anja's putting all the interesting links into the chat, so you don't actually have to try and copy it from the screen. It's actually going to be in the chat, so you can copy it and put it onto your Word document or whatever document you use, and you can go to these links later. So we have the link to the course in there, and Anja can maybe put it into the chats and comments once more. You can pre-order it now. We're releasing it in a few weeks, but you can already pre-order it. So how this is going to work is that the webinar is in two parts. First, I interviewed 12 people for this, practitioners and experts, researchers, police officers, ex-police officers. And first, we're going to show video clips of these interviews that describe what was going on, what was available, what's not available, and what the problems are and the challenges. But also, because I want you to, I'm always someone who wants to improve things. So the other part of the webinar is where they're actually talking about the solutions, things that are already in place, things that we should be having, and everything that you can do, or that I want you to come away from this webinar going to your chief and saying, hey, I just saw this, I heard about this. They're doing that over in New Zealand. They're doing that over in Illinois. I want to try this. Can we give that a try? It doesn't take much, or this is what it would take, but it would be so worth it. And again, because I'm trying to be helpful, I put everything into a poster, and I'm going to email that out to everyone who's registered. So the link to register is also in the comments or on the screen. So even whilst you're watching this, you can still register if you haven't actually registered, because then I know you want information specifically to this webinar. So I can then send you the free poster, and I'd like you to print it out, put it on the wall, and work through step by step, like this we can do, that we can do, this we can do. Okay, this we need to work on, and it's like a pathway to a mentally well police force. So that's what I want you to come away with: solutions. Okay, we're not here to just bemoan the current state of things. We're here for solutions as well. So I'm hoping to keep this at under 2 hours, but I make no promises. So I'm going to play the first video now. And it's from Amy Boudreau from Canada. And I did make the mistake of asking her to list everything that she's involved in working on. It takes ages to get through that list. She's so bloody busy, but she's also known as a yoga cop. And I'm going to play that now for you.
Amy Boudreau, and I'm a police officer, and I'm well known on social media as the yoga cop. Mental health is health. I think it's really important right now that we're focusing on how public safety personnel, we recognize that the majority, anyone working into those careers, are experiencing traumatic or disturbing situations more routinely than, let's say, the general population. Because the type of work that we do, we're often exposed to potentially threatening or unpredictable environments. And for those reasons, we're at a significantly higher risk for screening positive for mental health disorders such as so anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, any type of psychological difficulties through the work that we're in. So because of this overexposure of stress and trauma, we can develop occupational stress injuries over time. And I think we've really seen an increase, not even here in just Canada, but overall within the profession. There's a lot of people who are still suffering in silence. They might have depression, anxiety. This could even just be sleep disorders or having trouble sleeping because of the shift work. Obviously, that will have a huge impact even on our hormonal balance, our digestive system, because it throws off your circadian rhythm. So over time, you can get chronic pain, back issues, especially from wearing the equipment, inflammation, burnout from the nature of high fast, high stressful type of work. We can really get compassion fatigue over time too, because we're in a role of serving people all the time. And then, that's on the individual level, but how does that show up in our personal lives? So again, this can ultimately affect our relationships. Maybe when we're irritable or short-tempered, we can start to become maybe isolated or antisocial. Our moods are getting affected. So I just feel like all of that has a ripple effect from the individual going into the community. So mental health is super important to focus on, not only so that our members are healthier, but also for the community well-being as well. We're seen as individuals that are supposed to be called during crisis, and we're there to support the community members. So oftentimes we will shut off our emotions or how to regulate properly, but that's not healthy. When it comes to dealing with coworkers or our own family members. So improve the self-regulation skill set and resiliency is really important in this type of work. And it needs to be taught before you get into this type of job. So this is information that I've learned over the last 10 years. And I wish it was available to me when I first got into this profession, but I think we're realizing now how important it is and how much more we could be doing to enhance our profession with this information. The well-being and safety of our members is paramount, because we're the ones that are providing safety and security to communities. The more that you invest in wellness for people, the overall, the whole organization can thrive.
Well, there you go. That was Amy. And so what I'm going to do after each video as well is I'm going to, just pull out the main learning points that I think are the most relevant. So Amy said some really interesting stuff there. So as a police officer, you're in constant fight or flight mode. That is not good. It's very good if you're actually faced with danger for a moment. But if that is a constant, as it often is in policing, that is not very good for your well-being. So that affects mental health and physical health, especially in the long run. She was saying that, you need to shut off your emotions to serve the community, but that can be harmful for your personal and professional relationships. Is it about a 70% divorce rate in policing? So not good. And the well-being of members is paramount, because they're the ones who look after the community. Jeannie, do you have any short observations on what Amy said?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with what Amy was saying. That was a great segment. I think one of the most startling stats, I think, for me, is that stress is a common risk factor in 75 to 90% of all diseases, including those which are the foremost morbidity and mortality. And the most common stress-related diseases are things like cardiovascular disease, metabolic diseases such as diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, psychotic and neurodegenerative disorders, and cancer. So if people say it's just a bit of stress, actually, no, it's not. There's a lot more to it, and it can affect you in so many different ways. So I think that was a fantastic segment by Amy.
Stress is a lot more serious than many people will realize. I had a look at the comments, and I found the culprit from West Midlands Police that has sent all these people to us. Thank you very much, Trudy Gittins. So I'm really pleased that you did that, and I hope we don't disappoint today. And also, I'd like to get to this question. So this is from Bangladeshi police officers. Cyber criminals bring lots of indecent content in front of cyber police like us, even when we need to deal with. I'm not sure what that is, but so what are the tips to that these contents will not affect on our mind? So I can't even imagine doing this job, looking at indecent images of children being abused. However, what you're going to find interesting, that I actually have one of the speakers who talks specifically about what people viewing these images can do. That's Dr. Marla Friedman. In the second part of the webinar, she will address exactly that. So I'm really glad you asked that question. Our next contributor is James Ravenhall. He's a serving police officer, did lots of years in firearms training, has his own story to tell. And I'll get to him now.
I am an inspector at Thames Valley Police. I'm currently a neighbourhood inspector. Okay, the reason why I got into this field, in addition to like my day job, is that I've had my own personal health problems, physically and mentally. Unfortunately, probably like most officers with more experience, I got diagnosed with anxiety, secondary trauma, depression, some PTSD from an incident back in 2008. All this kind of led to quite bad insomnia. My mental health and physical condition kind of went downhill over 10 years, which I handled quite badly, like probably most police officers did. To combat the fatigue, I used caffeine far too much with things like gym pre-workouts to stay alert. During my time in Firearms Command, you can imagine there's no margins for error, so you always need to make sure that you're on fire. And then, unfortunately, then to bring myself down, I wouldn't say addicted to prescription sleeping tablets, but I did become reliant on Zopiclone to bring myself back down. Unfortunately, this combination of extremes led to my system getting very dehydrated, led me to having kidney damage. I developed gout of all things, which meant I had to go on tablets called allopurinol to help my system clean itself. And then gradually, obviously, my mental health went down as well. Eventually went through occupational health, went to my own doctor, and I finally accepted medication about this time last year, which has been kind of revolutionary for me. Once you start looking at the problem, I mean, the Police Federation detailed some figures back in 2009, where over 40 officers had died in similar circumstances driving to and from work. I believe there was one officer called Stacey Pike, and from what I read, she was 20, and it was her first night shift. She'd only been a police officer for a week. And then you look at the wider research, and there's lots of local studies, but if you go as far as, for example, the World Health Organization, they've scientifically linked the lack of sleep with cancer, poor immunity, cardiac disease, strokes, and identified nights as a working nights as an aggravating factor. And all this kind of adds up, and you kind of realise, and this is not just my police force. I've worked in numerous police forces, and for the best of my knowledge and from our conversations with the College of Policing, no officers, no staff get any kind of introduction about how to manage shift work. We actually get more input on how to maintain police officers' aids, how to maintain our Vauxhall Astras, or how to use our new smart mobile phones when they arrive. But if you look at the productivity, it's things like complaints are always higher on nights, accidents are always higher on nights, assaults are always higher on nights, because scientifically, depending on your circadian rhythm, but especially for most people, we're not supposed to be awake during those hours. And I believe the science shows that after 35, it becomes very difficult for someone to function in a night shift. And then when you look at some of the other dangers that are ignored, there was a study that showed after 17 to 19 hours of wakefulness, your performance on many tests drops below that found at the legal limits of alcohol for safe driving. I mean, that's why a lot of people unfortunately pass away having micro sleeps on the way home. And I personally myself have done that, and I was always in denial of it.
Right. So some of the main points of James here. Police die driving to and from work. Seems a little bit unnecessary. We're not supposed to be awake at night. Complaints, accidents, and assaults are more frequent during the night. That's quite interesting. And after 17 hours of wakefulness, performance can be as low as that below the legal driving limit. Now, do you want police officers, bimbling about, completely tired and fatigued throughout the night in that state? I don't think we do. Ginny, some quick comments, and then maybe we can get to some questions that have come in.
Yeah, just in respect of the accidents that people have driving home from work, when you're sleep deprived, you've a 20% greater chance of having a road traffic accident. And certainly for me, I'm aware of at least 3 or 4 colleagues who had accidents on the way home. 2 of them wrote the cars off, and they were lucky to climb out of them with just scratches. And again, it's this whole, trying to fight against the circadian rhythm, your body clock. It's fighting against that, because we're not designed to be awake. Now, clearly, there's nothing we can do about shifts. We have to work shifts because we have to be there 24/7. But we do have to start looking at the way we have shifts arranged to give people the best opportunity to get the sleep that they require, and to give them coping mechanisms. And I think James brought up a really great point that, we're told more about looking after a car that has a whole garage and mechanics to look after it than we are about looking after ourselves. And I think this is absolutely something that needs to come in at the very early stages of being a police officer, so that cops understand from day one the best way to look after themselves, so that these kind of things don't happen.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Can we, right, Harry Butler, if fitness is so important, why are the standards to get into the police so low? So I think he mentioned the bleep test. The bleep test, for anyone, who may be calling it something different, is you run to and fro, and you have less and less time to make it to each end. And, that's a fitness test that the police have to pass. Not sure what to say to that question. I think we're talking mainly about mental fitness today. Ginny, do you have a point to that?
I think it's interesting, actually, Harry. You're absolutely right. The standard is low. What's even more alarming is that not every police force, certainly in the UK, has a continuing fitness assessment. So once you're outside your probationary period, which is 2 years in the UK, that's you can get as heavy and as unhealthy as you like, which I think is totally wrong. And I also think, along with that, and I think it's going to get brought up by some of our guests today, we need to have a mental health fitness test. That's a priority. We need to educate, and we need to check up on cops. And it's not for the purpose of booting them out of the job. That's not what this is about. This is for the purpose of taking care of them. So I think it aligned with the fitness in terms of physical fitness, which can again help you with your mental health. I also think we actually have to have a mental health fitness as well.
Yeah, and something that's going on in the chat. So Dr. Marla Friedman is saying to Simple Code, the police officer from Bangladesh, to please get in touch with her. She's got a few ideas that would help you. And CSAM stands for Child Sexual Abuse Material. So thanks for clarifying that, Syed. Any more questions before we carry on with the next session? Because we need to be a little bit quick about this, because I don't want to keep you guys too long. There was one. Steve Thornton, he has something called Trojan Wellbeing. How do we encourage our colleagues to come forward and ask for support? The biggest problem I face is colleagues not feeling safe in coming forward. Actually, we're going to cover that in this webinar. We're going to talk quite a lot about that. So I'll keep you waiting for now. So next one. That's Dr. Jacqueline Drew, an amazing academic from Australia. So she's a police psychologist and has been doing this for about 20 years. And she's actually starting a 3-year research project that is going to do some pioneering work. And I'm going to play you her talk now.
Dr. Jacqueline Drew from the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Griffith University. I have over 20 years of experience as a practitioner and a researcher working in the psychology of policing. So when we think about the mental health of our police, our mind immediately really goes to the traumatic events that our police officers experience. So it might be attending a suicide, a fatal road or traffic accident, child abuse, or the physical dangers that our police face at the hands of offenders. And that's what we conceptualize as trauma or critical incident stress. But there's actually a couple of other factors that we really need to understand and think about much more. So the other factors include operational stress, which causes significant psychological harm. Operational stress are those things like shift work, disrupted eating and sleeping patterns, and also having unreasonable workloads, for instance. The other group of factors which I'm really interested in and we need to learn much more about is organisational factors, and they cause a lot of harm as well. These are things like leadership in our agency and supervision, feelings that the organisation's not just and fair in the way they deal with employees, feeling unsupported by police agencies are key elements of stress that police experience on a day-to-day basis. So while we know that trauma is really prevalent and impactful in policing, and we can see that because we see the level of post-traumatic stress and the levels of PTSD that we have in our police populations, We now have really a growing evidence base that suggests that these operational and organisational factors are potentially causing even more harm than critical incidents and traditional trauma of policing. What they found is that non-traumatic stresses are close to twice as likely to be stronger and more harmful than those traumatic factors that lead to things like depression and anxiety. So non-traumatic stress is much more strongly associated with poor mental health outcomes than traumatic exposures. So what that is telling us is that what is harming our police officers the most is actually the organisation and the job factors associated with policing, opposed to our traditional view that it is all about trauma. Trauma exposure in policing is inherent. It's always going to be part of the job. It can't be avoided by frontline officers. There's things we can do to help protect our officers, but we can't avoid trauma. Traumatic stresses are relatively unavoidable, but operational and organisational factors that cause harm, and as I've just said, cause more harm sometimes than trauma, can actually be changed and adapted and fixed by an organisation. So in a conversation with a police officer that was really enlightening to me, looking at the research that I was moving into around the organisational impacts in policing on mental health of police officers, a police officer related a story to me. He said to me that he had attended a very traumatic incident and there was a death in custody under his watch. And he was talking about it as the most stressful experience of his career. As we talked more and unpacked that stress that he had experienced, I could see he actually had a light bulb moment. So he looked at me and he said, now I'm talking about it more to you and I haven't really talked about it before. I understand actually that it wasn't the death in custody that affected me the most. It wasn't that trauma. It did affect me, but what was most impactful in terms of psychological harm was actually the way I was treated by the agency. The investigation that happened by the agency, a leader that was very unsupportive of the stress that he was going through, and colleagues that also didn't support him during that time. So it was interesting to see, and it really, I guess, was a light bulb moment for me as well, to understand how traditional trauma can be exacerbated, it can overtake, and it actually can be more harmful than an original trauma when you layer on poor organisational systems, and in particular, poor organisational leadership, where the officer doesn't feel supported by their agency.
Well, I have to say this blew my mind when Jackie first told me about this. I was not aware of that. I was not aware of the fact that these organizational stresses are much more harmful than the actual trauma that police officers experience. And she has a great example there. You know, a guy was on duty and he was in charge when the death in custody occurred. What was much worse for him than the death in custody was how he was being treated by the organization. So that is something the organization can change. And, you know, we mentioned earlier when Janine was talking, we can't remove the stress you're going to experience as a police officer, but we can remove all the crap that we're then putting onto you on top of that as well. And Jackie also told me that she actually found some research where people who are involved in viewing indecent images of children, for example, you know, getting back to that topic, even though what they look at is really traumatic, their mental health tends to be better than that of some of the other officers, because their role is very much respected within the organization and outside of the organization, and is respected by the community, and they have good leadership. So that really gives you some food for thought for, you know, how come we can look after those officers doing this horrible job? We can't look after the other officers doing that other horrible job. Ginny, any observations?
Yes, certainly. I think Jackie is absolutely right. I think certainly my stress, and even putting down my thoughts of suicide years and years ago, was more about operational stress and organisational factors than ever it was about any of the trauma I witnessed. And I think you will very often, when you speak to cops, and certainly it was always my experience as a police officer, and I still get it now, even as a coach helping police officers. you know, when something goes wrong, the organisation is like rats leaving a sinking ship, and the officer is isolated. They're automatically thought of as guilty, as opposed to being innocent until proven guilty. And I think that's very much a feeling that runs through police officers and police staff in the organisation, and that's absolutely something that can be changed. And I think it's time the organisation need to step up, and they need to start leading from the front, and great leaders lead from the front. And I think that's what the organisation needs as a whole. And I think it needs to be something that we can talk about openly in an organisation. With so many people in the world suffering from mental health, why do we assume that cops don't? And why do we assume that cops can't speak about it? I think we need to get past this organisational culture that, you know, we're tough, we're the ones that help. We don't need that. Well, that's rubbish. And I'm a living example of that. That's absolute rubbish. I don't consider myself weak, vulnerable, or a weak link as a cop. I was a good police officer, but the best of us fall by the wayside when we're not getting supported. And I think, you know, the worst feeling in the world is to go from being someone who's respected as a human being to being a collar number, a shoulder number. And I think there's far too much of that. And I think we need to get away from that. And we need to remember that we treat members of the public with transparency and integrity, and we support them and we protect them. Well, do you know what? The people who are working in your uniforms are identical to those people in the public. They need the transparency, the integrity, the support, and the care for them as well. So I think it's great that Jackie brought that up. And for me, for sure, most of my stress is absolutely down to those two things, as opposed to the trauma side of it. Absolutely. Wouldn't argue with that at all.
Okay. Do we have any questions, Anya? Sarah Manning, do you think organizational stress should be taken into account for occupational health referrals? Most support is only offered in relation to trauma and or injury to work. Short answer, hell yeah.
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Any more questions? I know that Kieran is saying that that Ginny already answered a question that she had. Do you think, therefore, a change in narrative is needed and have that safe place to talk, non-just yes. So we'll get to that as well. And actually, the next speaker, this gives me such a nice segue into that. The next speaker is going to bring that up. So he joined the police. We're getting to Rob Hosking now. He joined the police as a 22-year-old or 21-year-old, 22-year-old, I think. And you come out of the police academy or police training college. And you're fresh and you're motivated and you want to make a difference, and then you get paired up with a much more experienced cop, which is good. But if that experienced cop brings with them this toxic policing culture of just suck it up and get on with it, then that really doesn't work. So we need to change that culture, absolutely. And again, we're going to get to some steps on that in the second part of the webinar. So let me just play Rob's part here. So he had to leave the police after only 5 years. He was very accomplished in those 5 years. He was a hostage negotiator and he was a liaison contact for the anti-terrorist unit. But he didn't have the support he needed, and he really struggled with the lack of support that is there, and he's not the only one.
And I was previously in the police force from 2015 to 2020. I was a trained negotiator. I was also a local contest liaison officer dealing with counter-terrorism issues in the local communities. Within the police force, I feel like it's a very macho culture. It does not promote a safe space for anybody to be vulnerable. Going in at the age of 22, you become quite hardened to stuff because you're surrounded by people, the majority older cops, who are involved in this culture, who, in relation to, they do not want to show their emotion. They're quite hardened. They make they've got a dark humor. They make their jokes about situations. They will not take mental health serious in terms of whenever there's a mental health call that we need to go to and someone's in crisis. A lot of police officers will think that it's a lot of rubbish, so to speak, and they lack an empathy to other people because they have to be so hardened and so desensitized to every situation they deal with, that because they think that mental health's rubbish when someone else is in crisis. How are they ever in a position to deal with their own mental health and the mental health of their colleagues when you're listening to an older cop saying that this mental health call we're going to is a lot of rubbish? Therefore, you then do not feel like there's any safe space for you to ever tell anybody that you're maybe suffering with your own mental health. I dealt with many traumatic incidents during my time in the police for my 5 years, and not once did I ever admit to myself that I had perhaps my own mental health problems, because the police have a culture where you go again, because the way the shifts work, and because the police life consumes your life. If you've seen traumatic incident for a couple times on shift or whatever, the next day you go again, the next day after that you go again, and you never actually stop to understand your own mental health and why things have affected you, or to talk about it with colleagues and stuff, because you don't feel like you have that safe space to be able to talk about it. Especially younger cops coming in who, you know, not ever had to deal with these kind of things in their life, and now all of a sudden dealing with these kind of things, and having these hardened cops, so to speak, believe that you just get on with it, make jokes, and you move on with your life. Your colleagues and that culture of we don't need this, we'll just move on from it. We're police officers who are hardened, and we need to get on with it because we need to desensitize situations. We make jokes to make it better and stuff. However, make jokes all you want and maybe try to desensitize the situation all you want, but deep down, when you're going to bed each night, you're alone with your own thoughts, and your thoughts will always go back to the stuff you'd seen. And you don't make any jokes when you're about to go to bed at night, but you don't have anybody else there who's your colleagues who to make jokes and to just take away the seriousness of the situation. And in that way, it then ingrains in your brain, and you're thinking about it over and over again. Then you go into the shift next day, and perhaps you may want to talk about it, but it's forgotten about, and you move, and your colleagues have moved on, and now they're talking about other stuff that's nothing to do with mental health. They're not talking about the incident that you've perhaps seen. On my last shift, we had dealt with a road traffic accident where the person had committed suicide, and initially the traffic inspector and all attended, and my colleague and I were made to feel like criminals, so to speak. We were getting questioned because we had seen it. They assumed that we had maybe been following the victim, or maybe like had our blue lights on or anything. However, when we explained it to them that, you know, we'd just seen it, it was just by chance, they just walked away from us, and they didn't seem to care about our own mental health and what we'd been through. I remember about 3 of them, the traffic inspector and a sergeant and stuff, they were all just in a wee group, and we saw them talking and then sometimes looking over at us, and me and my colleague just standing there, having just witnessed that at the side of the road, feeling like we're made to be criminals, and not no one having an understanding of, wait a minute, they've just seen this, let's maybe put our arm around them and see how they're feeling. We were then made to take statements from the ambulance and someone else who'd seen it. Even though we'd just witnessed something very traumatic, we had to relive it by taking statements from it. I spoke to the inspector about it, and he was quick enough. And when I said, you know, I'm actually struggling a wee bit with mental health, I'm struggling to cope with it, remember he's like, oh, you should get help then. And that was it. He never contacted me ever again. There was no checkups each day being like, how are you feeling now? Like, have you got the help? Or putting me in touch with people who could help me. It was pretty much, oh, well, you should get help. You know, you should talk to someone about that. And it just passed the buck on to, well, that's your problem. That's not our problem, because why should we care anymore? That's what it felt like for me. That macho culture of unable to to speak to your supervisors about something, because heaven forbid they look at you in a different way and they may think you're not up for, you don't have the skills, or you don't have the ability of other colleagues who are able to desensitize and just get on with it. You could be seen as a burden, and that's the last thing you ever wanted to be seen as. So you just put it in the back of your head and just moved on and just carried on your shift. I was actually suffering from PTSD symptoms, and I had to speak to a counsellor about it. But I said that was all for my own back. I know I'd left the police at that time, but I never got the support I needed at that time, which then led to a year and a bit after me suffering from night terrors and flashbacks, and I was admitted into hospital with chest pains and stuff. I remember I'd been hooked up to like an ECG, and the ambulance driver was talking to me, and I was telling him about being in the police, and he said to me, anytime I mentioned the police, I had a heart palpitation. And he says, I think you're suffering from PTSD. And that was just even speaking about the police, not even about the incident. With so many cops, they're usually working with older cops who been there, done it, they're hardened to it apparently. And heaven forbid you ever say, look, I think I'm suffering here. You would never say it, because I don't think you'd be afraid of what their response would be or who they would tell. And then the next time you walk into the canteen or anything, you'd be looking around you thinking, who's looking at you in a different way, because heaven forbid you've spoken up about suffering mental health issues because of something you'd seen. Because they all think, well, we've all seen that. Who are you to say that you're suffering because you've seen one little thing? It's not, but everyone's different, and everyone needs to. These people who say they have not suffered from mental health issues because of traumatic incidents, it's because they've not allowed themselves to fully analyze and self-reflect about what's actually happened and how it's made them feel. And this is the problem that we need to change in the police. It's not just these hardened people who can drive a car fast and fight with the criminals and stuff like that. It's not about that. You know, those promotional videos about the police, shouldn't be about handcuffing people and chucking them in the back of the van. And unfortunately, like film and TV culture represents that kind of way of life. It should be the truth of you sitting down with someone who's crying in front of you because they've suffered from mental health problems. It should be people who are dealing with their own different crises at their point in their lives, and you having to deal with it, whether they're standing on the edge of a bridge or social work issues in terms of children and all. That's the stuff the police deal with. I can count on one hand how many arrests I could make in a month, but the amount of mental health calls and social work calls and all I dealt with, tons. That makes up, I think, about 80% of calls. Mental health, social work, kind of missing persons and stuff. That's the be all and end all.
So I think you'll probably agree with me that there's almost too much truth in there. And somebody has said that this guy speaks so much truth, too much to actually pull out. And it just all makes so much sense. So the police culture does not support or does not provide a safe space to speak up. And, you know, again, you're trying to fit into this hardened culture of, you know, this macho culture. And, you know, the word macho is just, I've never heard it in positive context. It's just bad. And, you know, the police did start out hundreds of years ago as thief takers. They were employed in the London docks to basically take thieves. This is not what it's like anymore. It's mainly safeguarding, and it's mainly mental health calls. And so these promotional videos that are, you know, all sirens, blue lights, and action, they're getting the wrong people in the first place, and they're not really showing people what it's actually going to be like to be a police officer. So, you know, some of the things he was mentioning, you just go from job to job, from shift to shift. You don't reflect on anything. And even if you want to speak about it, others seem to have moved on. But then Ginny told us they only seem to have moved on. You don't really know what's going on behind. TRIM services, so that stands for Trauma Risk Incident Management. So Rob made an interesting point there. It's an email you get. And even that email is you know, can be portrayed in a bad light by those macho officers. And then you don't want to respond to it. Young officers are impressionable and try to handle things like the older cops, i.e. not at all. They're not handling it, and that's a problem. You don't make any jokes when you go to bed at night. So I quite like what he said there. You know, make all the jokes you want. You know, nobody's listening when you're by yourself with your thoughts when you go to bed. And then he's given us a good example of that organizational trauma that Dr. Jacqueline Drew was talking about. They just witnessed somebody taking their own life, he and his colleague. Then they were being made to feel like criminals by supervisors who came in and looked at them funny, like, you know, did you maybe chase this person? No, okay, well, go and do some, you know, make yourselves useful, take some statements. Well, hang on. I was just a witness to something that this can affect me for the rest of my life. I now need to hear everyone else talking about it. So that's the secondary trauma. You know, this is something that could have been dealt with differently. And you don't want to tell anyone that you're suffering because you worry about how you would be seen. And yeah, Ginny, any short observations before we take some questions?
Yeah, that was a really powerful segment from Rob, and I recognise a lot of that he spoke about in my own experiences. And I think for sure there is definitely a macho culture which needs to go. This whole putting everything out of your thoughts. I mean, when I was 21 years old, I was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, had very little life experience, came in to help people. And the first thing I was told at training school before I even got to the streets was, you can put all that emotion in a box and shove it to the back of your head and don't let it out. And that was it. There was no, and when you get home or when you go and speak to somebody, it was just put it in the box and leave it there. And we've still, to a degree, still got that mentality. And when we need to get beyond that. And again, it's about making it easier for cops and staff to come forward and say, I'm struggling. And if that means that they don't want to speak to someone in the organisation, then give them a number that they can ring that is totally not to do with the organisation. It needs to be that the kind of help we need to offer needs to be lots of different types of help. And it needs to be something that is easy to get to. But we absolutely need to address the culture in the police. And I've even had senior officers said to me, well, never happened to me when I was a young cop. Well, you know, get on with it. It's 30 years ago. Come on. Things have changed a lot. Things have moved on a lot. And I would question that it didn't happen to them 30 years ago. If they sit down and they're totally honest with themselves and they allow themselves to go into that dark space that's in your head sometimes, I would challenge them to say, actually, you have been there, but you're not necessarily getting the amount of stress and stuff that cops get now because it's a faster pace of living, but we're still living as if we're some sort of macho heroes, and we're not. We're people who do heroic things, but we need support and we need to open that up to cops in a way that's accessible for them and in a way that they trust, because trust is a huge thing. And I know that, you know, the EAP, the Employee Assistance Programme, I've had good and bad experiences with that, but I know lots of cops who wouldn't even think about ringing them. So we need to offer cops other things other than things that are necessarily aligned to the organisation to help them get the help they need.
Speaking of EAP, Employee Assistance Program, actually somebody asked a question earlier. Is there any research on why officers don't use it? I'm not aware of any research, but in the last force that I was at, we did have an Employee Assistance Program that was just being brought in. Me being very open-minded about counseling, you know, I did take advantage of that. I booked some sessions. But first of all, some potential barriers is you can only use them to where I was. You could only use them to get sessions with a counselor in your area once every 12 months. So how do you know that if you take advantage of that now, you're not going to have a more serious issue further down the line, and then you can't use them anymore? So in a way, you're sort of keeping it for something really bad. The other thing is these were potentially great counselors, but they had nothing to do with police. They were not they were not familiar with policing or anything like that. But you can use them for whatever you want. You know, you can use them for relationship counseling, anything, and that's great. But it's, you know, as Ginny knows very, very well, and then that's actually a gap that she's filling. You know, she's providing herself as someone who understands the job, so you can go and speak to someone who knows exactly what it's like. And some people also don't trust the confidentiality issue, even though it's external. They're scared that a report is going to come back to work in some way. And again, it's a stigma. It's, you know, we're not providing that safe space that we've got here. Any questions that we've got?
Could I just say, Suzanne, that I referred to the occupational health nurse who did some question and answers with me over the phone I didn't even get to see a real person. And it came back that I was depressed. And her response to me was, well, you're only depressed, you can get back to work. And I'm like, seriously? And that was her response. And she couldn't understand why I found night shifts such a difficult thing to do. And even though I pointed out to her that she had left nursing because she didn't like doing night shifts, apparently it was okay for me. So you get a different, I'm not saying they're all bad, absolutely not. There's some great occupational health nurses out there, some great people in EAP, and as you said, there's some great counsellors. But again, you get that kind of experience, it kind of bitters the pill for you.
Yeah. Gareth, Katie, what must organizations do to prevent anger, sadness, fear, shame, and guilt born out of significant emotional events from affecting future behavior and harming officers and staff long term? I think it's a good question, and we'll actually cover some potential answers in the second part of the webinar when our speakers are going to come up with some tools and solutions. And it's also going to be on that solutions poster that everyone can get who's registered for the webinar. You can still register for the webinar that you're watching right now. It's very, very meta, very matrix, but you can register and you will get sent that poster. I just wanted to show this one. Sayed, so he actually tried to save someone's life when he was off duty. Unfortunately, that person did die, and that in itself is traumatic. And then the inspector said, I hope you don't think you're going to book on duty for that. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
That's just horrible. Any more questions, Anya, before we move on? Okay, right. So the next person, she's actually watching right now, Dr. Marla Friedman. So she's kindly already offered some assistance to the police officer in Bangladesh. So Marla is a very, very dedicated police psychologist and chairman of Badge of Life. And we're going to put the link into the comments for you now. So if you're in the US, this is something you can access. She has private practice where she sees clients, police and non-police, and she assists on cold cases as well. She's based in Illinois, USA. So Badge of Life, if you want to click on the link, just copy it onto your paper. Don't go and check websites out now. Concentrate fully on us. We're most important now. So this is a short session because most of her interview actually was solutions. So she's going to be more in the second part. I'm going to play her video for you now.
Badge of Life, which is the National Nonprofit Association for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, specifically for law enforcement. So I train, I teach at the police academy. I have a group of trainers that I can send anywhere in the country. Our main focus now is training and education about mental health and suicide prevention. All this pressure and stress is building and building. And so I asked chiefs, who do you want on the street? Do you want an officer who's depressed and anxious, having panic attacks, a lot of things that would interfere with their reaction time, and plus just disruptive to their life on the job and at home? Or do you want someone who's been treated and then you give them a gun and put them out there? And yet the stigma is still so great. Stigma is lightening a little bit. I notice I teach at the police academy, the younger ones, they're more open. I mean, they'll ask questions in class, whereas when I teach field training officers, they've already been on the job a number of years. They're not raising their hand. They're not offering information about their lives. But the young ones, they don't know yet. And they're saying, hey, my husband's got that disorder or this, it's kind of a pleasure, to have the young ones in there, but it changes over time because as soon as they get in the car with their field training officer, the FTO is who teaches them how to be a cop.
Apologies, that was my mistake there with the editing, that suddenly that video became a lot bigger. So that was Marla Friedman. So one interesting thing she said was young officers are more open-minded. That's sort of similar to what Rob Hoskins said. You come in blue-eyed or wide-eyed and you want to make a difference. And then do you adapt? Do you harden because of what the existing culture is like? And also, I really like what she said when she's saying to Chief, who do you want on the street? Do you want people who are at the end of their tether in America with a gun and, being in really highly stressful situations where many other people have guns? That's something we don't have here in the UK, fortunately. Or do you want someone who's treated? So who's going to be the better cop? Who's going to be more reliable? Who's the stronger cop? Is it the one who's close to having a mental breakdown, or is it the one who's actually sorted through the issues? Maybe like Ginny's helping officers with building up resilience, being able to handle their stress, being able to switch off, being able to recognize situations and use tools. So I really love that question, Ginny. Any observations? And that's actually a question for you specifically in the comments.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of speaking to Marla last week, actually, prior to today's event. And I love what she's doing. I love that she's going straight to the chiefs, because as I mentioned in an earlier comment, leadership starts at the top. You want to build up trust. You want to build up that change in culture. Well, guess what? You start with a head man or head woman, because they're the person who can change the culture in their organisation. And I love the work that Marla's doing, and she's absolutely right. Young cops come in, you're full of enthusiasm, you're all excited. But to survive in a police environment, you have to mould yourself. You have to become what that environment asks of you. You have to become what the culture demands of you. Otherwise, you won't last. You won't survive it. Is it right? No. The culture's wrong, and we know the culture's wrong. But in order to survive as a police officer, in order to have that career that you've longed for a long time, as most cops do, you have to change for it. What I would suggest now is we need to change the organisation. We need to change that culture. For sure, you have to have that professionalism about you. So yes, you do have to step back from any sort of emotional attachment to the incident you're dealing with. For sure, you have to do that. But there are things we can put in place to support our officers so that they don't have to carry that burden with them for the rest of their life. And I think, starting at the top, leading with the chiefs is a great way to start. Let's get everybody involved. Let's learn from everybody else. Let's not reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of information out there, plenty of resources being done, plenty of research being done. Let's share. And if somebody else in Illinois has learned something, well, there's no reason why that can't work in London. If there's something has happened in Aberdeen, there is no way it may not be able to help in Karachi. Come on, we're all in the same job here. Let's pull together. This has got to be a cohesive plan. It's no good, New Zealand being fantastic and everybody else being rubbish. There's stuff out there we can learn from each other. Stop being so territorial and start thinking about the human beings that are sat there in uniforms that are struggling and are on their knees.
Mic drop. Yes, New Zealand is fantastic.
Sorry, I got all passionate there. I'm sorry about that.
All right. So, Ginny, what are your views on debriefs after incidents? Who should chair debriefs? Because I have heard that it can be done wrong, and it can actually go wrong because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Debriefs after incidents, I wouldn't necessarily say directly after incidents a good time to do it. You need to give people time to process. For sure, one of my experiences of a trim debrief was a triple fatal road accident that I was involved in. There were 6 cops in the room. Our sergeant says to us, okay, we're doing a trim. Everybody okay? Anybody having issues? And of course, everybody sat there like, I'm not saying anything. And we went, no, we're fine. And they went, great. And that was it. No follow-up. No, nothing. No taking you individually into a room and saying, look, it's been a tough one. How are you doing? If you need me, here's my number. There's none of that. So should it, all these kind of things are great if you've got the people trained and they are enthusiastic for what they want to do and they can see the purpose of a debrief. I wouldn't necessarily do it straight after an incident. I think we need to give people time to deal with that. I think we need to give them support. But necessarily the debrief could come maybe a day or two later. I think it needs to be someone who has perhaps more experience and knowledge of the psychological effects of a trauma. So it's not just a case of bunging it onto the sergeant who hasn't got a clue what he's doing. He's thinking, oh God, I hate this part of the job. I wish they won't make us do this, because that's what happens. I'm not knocking sergeants or any officer in the police service. They're often given tasks that they are ill prepared for. I can see an opportunity for us to have mental health first aid as mandatory. I can see mental health buddies. I can even foresee why can't we have someone who's a mental health debriefer for incidents, who has got that level of understanding of mental health. And let's think about how we approach people. We've got this culture where we won't talk out in front of other people because we don't want to be seen as vulnerable. We don't want to be seen as weak. We don't want to not be trusted by our colleagues again because we got a little bit emotional about something. You know what? It's not weak to cry. But if you keep putting people into a melting pot where they are faced with their colleagues, none of them who are owning up to having a struggle with this, do you honestly expect them to speak the truth? No, I never did. I never once put my hand up in a trim session and said, actually, this is crippling me. I just want to cry about this because this was really hard for me. Does it make me weak? No, absolutely not. But my perception at the time was, if I speak up now, what are my colleagues going to think of me?
Yeah.
Am I going to be trusted in the future? Oh, she's been all emotional again. Oh, and let's not forget, we might just put the woman thing on it. No, it's because she's a woman. Yeah. But do you know what? We're all entitled to feel emotional, and that includes guys. But we're still in a society where it's not okay for boys to cry. It's not okay for men to have emotions. We need to get past that. And again, like I said, it's going to be a long haul for society, but there is no reason why the police service can't lead on this. People look up to us. We need to show them what to look at, as opposed to the negativity that's in the press right now.
Yeah, sorry. Any more questions before we get to the next part? Family liaison officers are appointed straight away after serious incidents. Who's there to look after members and officers straight after? So family liaison officers are appointed to deal with the family of the victim of an incident, to be a direct point of contact. And I think what Donna is saying here, that, you've got police liaison officers in Garda, so that's in Northern Ireland, I think. The Republic of Ireland, the Garda Síochána. And actually, I didn't know that you guys had that. I think that's really good, and maybe we should have that in other forces. Thank you very much for sharing that.
I think just to say, actually, I dealt with some very, very serious road accidents. One of them, which the triple I mentioned earlier, we weren't given a family liaison officer. So myself and my colleague had to deal with all three families and relive the trauma of their emotions in response to losing a lost one. And we were told, just suck it up and get on with it, because it's a waste of time. Because potentially they would have needed 3 liaison officers, 1 for each family, and they weren't prepared to go there. So guess what? We got nothing.
Yeah.
And me and my colleague had to deal with everything, the whole investigation, the whole inquiry, and then we had to go and play another part for the families.
Any more
no support.
Questions? Sorry, Ginny. Any more questions before we move on? Do we now have specialized role for response officers, hunters and sentinels, so they can offer a more specific service for members of the public? Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
No? Okay. Any more questions? No. Okay. So this is actually a good place to just talk about Ginny's course again that's coming up. So Anya's going to put the link to that into the comments. You can pre-book it now, and it's specifically to deal with some of the issues that people are bringing up. It cuts out the police culture. You can go and get that help without anyone knowing. It cuts out the organization knowing anything about it, because you can go and get it yourself. Although we're hoping that that organizations will sign up their police officers to it, and it gives you long-term tools you can use, not just as one-off, but that equip you with things. It's like things on your tool belt. You can use it when you need it. And remember, we're holding a competition, so one lucky person can win this course for free for themselves, or for someone who needs it more. And we're not going to then announce who it is. So this is the Emergency Stress Pit Stop course. Could really be what you need. And actually, so that's the first feature-length course on the Police Science Doctor Academy. That's my learning platform. So as I mentioned in the beginning, Police Science Doctor is working with a number of experts to create online learning courses for law enforcement all around the world. There's currently 2 free courses on there already. I created those. This one is behavioral science in policing. It just gives you a bit of an introduction to the research and science that is out there in the field. For people who haven't watched every single one of my videos, there's 30 videos uploaded in the library at the moment. So it's a selection of those. And the other one is how to do evidence-based policing in 4 steps. It has reopened its doors today. It was very popular when I had it open last year. I had to shut it down, but it's reopened now. So it's a free course, introduction basically to evidence-based policing, how you can do it yourself. So you can visit the Police Science Doctor Academy, and Anya's putting the link in there for you now. Just copy it onto your document and go and have a look later. Right, so the next talk is by Dr. Yvonne Taylor. She's a chief inspector in the UK, and she's currently seconded to the College of Policing, and she's working in the National Wellbeing Service. And we're going to put the link to the National Wellbeing Service into the comments for you now as well. You can copy that out. If you're in the UK, that might be very relevant for you. And here is Yvonne.
Yvonne Taylor. I'm currently a Chief Inspector working for the National Police Wellbeing Service, and I am leading on all things sleep and fatigue. It's a very new post. I've only been in role for 1 month, and I'm on secondment from West Yorkshire Police. I'd never really considered how I would deal with working shifts, preparing for them or coping with shift work. It wasn't really something that was discussed back then when I joined. There was no introduction on working shifts, no hints and tips. We just kind of got on with it. My research has involved an investigation of shift work and fatigue driving, specifically with police service employees. So not just police officers, but those other members of the police family who might also work shifts or irregular hours as well. So such as dispatchers within the force control rooms. And in that, I was particularly interested in the commute home from work. I discovered that road traffic incidents contributed greatly to the number of officer deaths over the years, and that sort of made me more determined to explore the issue a bit further, finding that whilst on nights, the participants obtained around 2 hours less sleep than they did compared with other shifts. Shift work's always going to be needed. It's not something that we can just get rid of, so we have to find the best way of managing the shifts we work, I guess, and how we deal with the fatigue that causes. So fatigue's not something that's generally been openly discussed in policing. It's not something that's easy to deal with, and that might account for some of the reasons, I guess, why many might have been reluctant to open that particular can of worms. In the 50-year period between 1970 and 2019, 1,126 officers were killed overall in the line of duty. 495 of those were as a direct result of road traffic incidents. Only 37% of those were on-duty deaths, and the rest were whilst commuting, so 26% commuting to work and 37% commuting home from work. We do get tired. It's not normal for us to be awake through the night and to function through the night, and that can be difficult for shift workers to manage. They're usually trying to sleep at the wrong times for their body clock. Organisations, I think, need to consider recommendations around favourable shift patterns, along with...
Whoops, I don't know what I did there. Again, I messed up a bit in the editing. Apologies for that. But very interesting things mentioned by Yvonne. Half of deaths of police officers are actually called in road traffic incidents, and the majority of those are commuting home from work, especially. So it's unnatural for us to be awake through the night, and yet officers have to do it, and then they have to be alert to drive back home, and then they have to try to sleep during the day. I can't sleep during the day unless I'm really sick, so I don't know how you guys do that. And people get 2 hours less sleep when working night shifts, so really dangerous. What do you think, Ginny?
Yeah, totally. There are optimal conditions for sleeping. Doing it during the day, obviously, isn't it? But again, very relevant information she brought forward, because all you're doing, it's not just the number of hours you're at work, it's the commute on either side as well, which makes it a long day when you're tired.
Yeah, and that's really dangerous. Any questions? I think there's one for Ginny again. Do you feel there is less stigma in law enforcement around reaching out for coaching versus therapy? Very interesting.
I guess, yeah, because therapy suggests there's something wrong with you. And I think people don't want to say they're seeing a therapist. They'd rather say, oh, I'm seeing a coach. But I think there's still a stigma about seeing anybody for help, in all honesty. And it's all back to the culture. I think maybe going to say I'm off to see my coach makes you sound a little bit, oh, that's interesting. You say you're going to see a therapist, people automatically write you off. But I think we just need to address the whole culture thing so that it's not an issue to say that you're getting help.
Yeah. Any more questions before we move on? For Ginny, as a retired cop who has benefited from coaching to overcome trauma and stress, would you recommend chief officers invest in coaching to reduce occupational stress in the years to come?
I would recommend anybody to invest in getting some coaching to help them with stress. We come away from school, as I said earlier, we don't have a manual on how to deal with what goes on in your head and how that affects you physically, mentally, emotionally, or behaviourally. Knowledge is power, it always has been. So do you know what? Getting a little bit of self-awareness can only be a good thing. And if you understand stress, if you understand your triggers, then you're going to be in a much better place to be able to survive the challenges of life, because stress is always going to be coming and knocking on your door in some shape or form.
Okay, I think that was it for the question. Again, if you want a certificate and if you want the poster with the pathway to a mentally healthy police force, make sure you register. You can still register now, and I'll be able to send you that. So the next contribution is from Sergeant Scott Sophie from a town called Evanston in Illinois in the US. And just to show off again, he sent me some swag. So he sent me this, and that's for the peer support program. That's something we're going to be talking about in the second half as well. So there's a really interesting peer support program that he's going to be discussing, and the advantage for that. And I think it's important, and that's going to be on the poster as well, that you offer internal support and you offer external support. People need to be able to choose. Some don't want external, some don't want internal. So I'm going to play you Scott's video now.
Staff here. I work for the Evanston, Illinois Police Department here in the States. I've been with the police department for 18 years. I hold a rank of sergeant, and I currently supervise the community policing unit here. Historically, and I don't think it is just in the States, officers are very hesitant to seek help for their own issues because they're so used to helping others that it could potentially be seen as a sign of weakness. I think with healthier employees, you have less sick time. You have employees who are less confrontational with people that they're going to encounter in the community. I think your community relations are better off when you have those healthy officers, and peer support can play an integral role in that and in officer wellness. Okay,
so officers are reluctant to seek help as they're the ones who usually help others, and they're worried it's going to be seen as a sign of weakness. This is a recurring theme during this whole webinar here. So he's talking about the peer support program. We're going to hear more about that. And healthy employees are seek less confrontational, and deal differently with the communities they serve. So there's an impact on the community again. Ginny, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Scott's totally right. The healthier and fitter you are, the better you are as a person, and the easier you are in terms of dealing with other people. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's a vital thing.
Okay, do we have any questions that came in since we last asked? No. Okay. So the next person is Sam Smith, somebody very special actually. Sam is the founder of Green Ribbon Policing Campaign. His aim is for there to be a national standard set in law that police forces must adhere to when it comes to preventing and treating mental ill health in the police force. He was a police officer. He did not come out well. He had to leave after only 3 years because of what was going on. And he just said to himself, and I love people like that, right, this is not right. So something needs to be done. Nobody's doing it. Okay, I'll do it. So this is exactly what Sam is doing.
So yeah, I'm Sam Smith, and I'm an ex-police officer. I founded a campaign called Green Ribbon Policing, campaign for better mental health in policing. I was a frontline officer, and unfortunately, I eventually had to leave after about 3 years due to a decline in my own mental health, which was caused from the trauma I experienced in the job daily. So upon leaving, I wanted to see sort of a change in mental health provisions within policing, and I wanted to see less people go through what effectively I did. So that's kind of what my interest is, and that's where I got started with it all. When I joined, you go through a sort of a pretty extensive training program, which lasts about, I think it was about 13 weeks when I did it, and I think it's now 16. And within that training period, you get a sort of a police safety training, I think they call it, or a personal safety training. And that includes your physical health, how to effectively wear your uniform properly, how to use your cuffs, how to use your equipment, so your PPE, but also how to safely detain people, how to deal with violent offenders and violent situations to protect yourself, but also protect the public and effectively the person you're arresting. But there was nothing on mental health. And then you go on and you do the job, so you get thrown in, quite at the deep end. And some of the things I remember that really first stuck in my head, I guess, from a traumatic point of view, was the amount of dead people you come across, the amount of death and I guess bloody gore you see in real life. It's quite weird because you see things on films these days and they're very realistic, but it's nothing quite like it when it's in real life. I remember the first sudden death I went to. The gentleman had been dead for weeks. Unfortunately, he didn't have much family, so he went unfound, and they only found him through an infestation of flies on the flat below. Someone had obviously gone to investigate and then eventually found that this gentleman had died, and it was the heat of the summer, so his body had started to rapidly decay. Parts of his body weren't really attached anymore. His face had been completely eaten away by maggots. I remember, like, just when he was moved, he literally just split into two, and you got all bodily fluids everywhere, and it was horrific, really. And I remember thinking, oh my God, it's just overwhelming sense. You can smell it, you can taste it in the air, which is a weird thing to say, but you can. And then just the seeing a person in that position has a massive effect on you. But then you have a job to do. You have a job you signed up to do, and it's something that you've got to do and stay professional effectively. And I knew that this is something I might experience, but it's not quite what you kind of ever imagine. And doing that for so long, eventually you do kind of get used to it, and it becomes very normal. And what you do in your day, which can be quite horrific, whether you're being, in some sort of massive violent situation where, you're fearing for your own safety or your colleagues' safety, or whether you're seeing death or brutality, it does become very normal. It's just an element to the job. But if you're not effectively doing anything to look after yourself, that's when it can start to have an effect. And I noticed about 2.5 years in, well, actually I didn't notice, my partner noticed that I'd become very unsociable in my spare time. I was very hypervigilant, so I was very aware of things like sounds, and like when I'd go driving, if I ever saw anyone doing anything at all illegal, it's like I couldn't switch off from it. It was almost like I was not a person anymore, I was just a police officer. But also I was increasingly shown as not being very happy. I never wanted to do anything with anyone outside of work. On night shifts, for example, I'd spend the whole day with the curtain shut in the dark, just maybe watching telly and stuff, and then I'd go out and do the night shift, so I could have a whole week of just being in the dark, and I didn't think there was a problem with that. So my behaviour, my personality was rapidly changing. I think I became very unaffectionate to my partner, very I wouldn't say unkind, but cold. I really struggled to, show any emotion with anything. And she worried about me and suggested that maybe I was struggling with my mental health, and I shrugged it off to being, no, I'm fine. This is just what it's like being a police officer. This is how you get. This is just normal, and very defensive. And it wasn't until I eventually got a bit of an intervention from a more experienced police officer who was a good friend of mine, and sort of said, look, Sam, you need some help. And I went to the doctors, and it was effectively opening a can of worms. The doctor said, you are a moment away from a breakdown. You need to pull away from everything. This is ridiculous. You can't go on like this. You've got so much on your shoulders. She signed me off for several months sick, which I was really angry about at first. I remember saying to my partner, oh, look what you've done now, sort of thing. But over time, I came to terms with it, and actually really feel like if it wasn't for my partner interjecting, I could have, who knows what could have had happened to me. But after I came back, I felt like a bit of an idiot. I felt that I was being judged. I felt like everyone saw me as a, weak and like a letdown, that I hadn't been in and stuff like that. So I really felt quite useless, and it was just a really horrible feeling. It took me months and months and months before I was even suggested that someone would actually get me any support, and then the support was dropped. And when I was off sick the first time, no one checked I was okay. I just felt completely clueless of what I was meant to be doing. I felt on my own. I felt like I wasn't getting any help or what was wrong with me, or whether I could just go back to work because I felt a bit better. And it was just that sort of sense of there was no accountability. It was like, just leave him at home, pay him. And it was almost just like you really feel like you're just a number at that point. The equality is still not there. If they were people, that mental health is the person that has not been given the equal right to succeed. And that is quite upsetting to me, because if you look at the figures and the stats, actually mental health is actually a bigger cause of officer death and officer sickness than any physical injuries. So it just shows you how serious it is, and why we're not treating it equal is, again, another reason why I'm campaigning. They've always seen physical health as being more of an occupational hazard than mental health in policing, when really they both are occupational hazards in their own right. But arguably, actually, mental health has been illness and disorders have been shown to be way more deadly to police officers than physical health problems. But that could also be because we're not investing enough in prevention and actually protecting them when it comes to psychological well-being. If I'm asking for hundreds of thousands of people, really, not just the police officers, not just the police staff in this country, but also the general public, who deserve a healthy member of the police come and help them when they need, not someone who's mentally ill and maybe dangerous because of their illness.
So there you go. Again, very, very important stuff here from Sam Smith. So the initial police training covers personal safety training, how to handcuff someone, a little bit of self-defense. Why don't we defend our mental health as well as our bodies? He became cold, did not realize this was weird. And I thought it was quite interesting that he said, he shrugged it off saying, no, I'm fine. This is just what being a police officer is like. Spending his days between night shifts in the dark. He thought it was normal because nobody was telling him it wasn't. He was a moment away from a breakdown, felt judged when he came back from sick leave. That's really bad, isn't it? Had no support when he left, and mental health is being discriminated against. Definitely. What do you think, Jenny?
I think, unfortunately, that's not uncommon. I think a lot of people experience that, certainly for sure back in the 90s when I had my breakdown and I considered suicide. Not a single police officer contacted me of any rank to see if I was okay. And I think there was a huge sigh of relief when I left, because it was easier for me not to be there than for them have to deal with whatever the outflowing was of that particular episode. And I think it's a crying shame that happened in 1991 to me, and I think it's even more of a shame that it's still happening in the 2000s to officers. It absolutely needs to change. There was a study in investigative quality of investigation into the mental health in the UK police force, which was conducted on the 130,000 UK police officers in 2018, where half of the officers in the UK had taken sickness absence for mental health issues in the previous 5 years. I think that's frightening, and I think it tells its own story.
Yeah. Any questions that have come in? Are any higher risk industries getting this right? For example, fire services, militaries, offshore rig industries, etc. Are they getting the mental health response and structural support right? As I have no idea if they are. I know that the military leaves a lot of people behind who suffer with PTSD. I don't know about the other services. Jenny, do you know anything?
I think the number of organisations that I am friendly with on Facebook and places like that deal with PTSD for ex-military personnel and ex-emergency services would suggest that no, they're not getting it right. But then when you look at the whole of the world, we're not getting it right, full stop.
Yeah.
So if we're not getting it right in society, we're not going to be getting it right anywhere else. But again, as I've said maybe a couple of times now, there's an opportunity to lead the way and get this right in this area of work, and then start showing that to the world and saying, look, this is what we do for our cops. This is what we should be doing for everybody.
Just want to show this comment by Steve. So something about Marla what Marla said. Police officers lie every year on their annual checkups and are concerned about losing their operational status, especially those in a specialist role. Actually, our next speaker, Dr. Barbara Pavlo, is going to address that. And Marla's also going to speak about that again in the second half. Any more questions, Anya? No. Okay, so Barbara Pavlo then, Dr. Barbara Pavlo, she's a police psychologist at the LAPD. And whenever I say LAPD, I just think Hollywood movies and TV shows. It's just this glamorous thing. But sorry, that's someone from outside the US. I find it really interesting how she, as a police psychologist, works not just for the police and in the police, but alongside them. So I'm just going to play you her video now. Just going to play you her video now.
Barbara Pavlo, and I am a police psychologist with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I've been there nearly 16 years. I think the LAPD is very different in how they utilize the police psychologists. Of course, we're there to talk about any individual issues a sworn or a civilian personnel may have. Sometimes that includes work obligations or the people they're working with or the shift that they're working, as well as any marital issues or relationship issues. So we do that, but we also, I think we're unique and we're part of the SWAT team, and the SWAT is Special Weapons and Tactics. And we actually have a rotation where we all go out, there are 13 of us, and we work with SWAT, where we have a bulletproof vest on, we wear a helmet, we have to go downrange, work on the SWAT truck, and we assist with crisis negotiation, or we call it hostage negotiation. And it plays a big part because we get to actually be in the field and experience some of those split-second decisions. We help assist whether or not we should put gas in if somebody's refusing to come out in a hostage situation. In a suicide attempt, I've climbed up many rooftops, and we engage the individual, and because of our psychological background, we're able to assist in whether or not the suspect is on a drug and what drug that may be, or if there's a mental illness and how to treat that mental illness so that we don't further agitate the person. For, I would say, a good 5-6 years of my early career, police would tell me that they were afraid to come to see us because the psychologists, or as we were known, the shrinks, would take our gun and badge. If we went in, they could destroy our career. And perhaps in the past, there were some doctors that did that. I'm not sure of the circumstances, nor am I sure of the validity of that happening, but that certainly was a rumor. And I think the rumor has been dispelled because we see more people now than we ever have, and it consistently increases because most of the doctors are there not to take away their guns and badges. I'm certainly not. I want to genuinely help and help them do their job better and make their relationships better. And it's very hard when you work all day making decisions, life and death, on a split second, and then coming home to your wife saying, "What do you want for dinner?" Oftentimes the answer is, "I don't care." And after a few times, the spouse may say, "Well, when will you care?" And I think it's also important to inform the family members of police officers to what their job consists of, eliminating the details, because sometimes that would be overwhelming. So, there's a lot of contributing factors to what we do and what makes us accessible. And I think it really has, what we've done over the years of being in the field with SWAT, as well as going to the divisions, and being human instead of being this robot of a police psychologist has made a huge difference with the amount of people that want to come and see us. The one thing I would like to add is, for any law enforcement from any place in the world, thank you. Thank you for risking your life to save those. I mean, the oath is to serve and to protect. And I think on a daily basis, most people do that. And it's not a job that is idealized. It's not a job that you get many thanks for. There's a lot of injuries that the public has no idea about. And police suffer in silence. So I want you to know that there are people out there like myself that understand, and we're here for you. You know, you call for backup, let us be part of your backup.
Well, there you go. I think that was really impactful. So something really interesting about the setup there. So the in-house psychologist is available to the officers without limitations. So, and you know, would you not feel a little bit more trusting of a psychologist who's climbed onto a roof with you on so many occasions, and you know, maybe that distrust can be built down. And she's also raised an important point that we haven't talked about much here, is relationships between police officers and their spouses. Actually, Barbara and I are having a thought about maybe we can put a course together for law enforcement spouses, because again, we mentioned the 70% divorce rate. You come home, you know, you don't want to be making another decision, and your spouse might be getting upset that you're not taking part in family life, you're not showing an interest, and both sides are right. You know, nobody's wrong here. Both sides are completely understandable. How do you juggle that? How do you keep people together? Ginny, any observations?
Yeah, I love that bit by Barbara. I think it's fantastic that, you know, someone who's a psychologist who didn't sign up to be a cop is happy to climb up on a roof, wants to be there and experience what cops go through. And I think that's huge for credibility with cops, because certainly my experience and the experience of a lot of my clients is that usually when they go and finally pluck up that courage to go and get the help, they end up dealing with people who don't understand their job. And that becomes a huge barrier to them actually getting any help. They spend most of the time talking about things that happen in the job and walk away from a session at the end thinking, well, I feel like I've just been on a reality TV program, because the person sat opposite them was more interested in what happens, not about how you can help that person. So I think it's hugely beneficial that a cop can sit down and talk to someone who they know understand what goes on. And the fact that you've got some psychologists there, and I take my hat off to them, good on them. They climb up on a roof, they go and help out in the SWAT truck. Come on. Fantastic. And I think we need to do more of that. And if you're wanting cops to get help, then give them people who have the credibility to help them, and people who they don't have to explain the job to, because they have actually experienced it.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And I'm sure there's lots of psychologists who would love to be out in the field as well. So I think we just need to look at the setup. I think every force should have a psychologist for many things, to do research with the police, to do evidence-based policing, maybe other psychologists or the same person to help the police, you know, being there as a counselor, so to speak, and to be operational, you know, hostage negotiating, doing some, you know, investigative analysis. There's so many things that could be done. And there's so many investigative psychologists who would want to do that, or police psychologists. We're just not creating those roles. Any questions, Anya, before we move on? There's been a lot about the impact of stigma on accessing support. How do you think organizations can tackle this stigma? We'll actually get to that. So I'll keep you in the dark for now, Sarah, if you don't mind, because I don't want to take the wind out of the speakers who will cover that. But it's a very good question and very, very important. Any other questions? No. Okay. So the next person we're going to hear speak is Phil Spencer. He's based in the UK. He's a police inspector with Cleveland Police. And I think there's a Cleveland Police in America as well, but this is the UK one. He's got a very different accent than Americans. He's a Mind blue light inspector. So Mind is a charity, and Anya's going to put the link into the comments, into the chat. If you're in the UK, you can access them. So Mind is a mental health charity, and the Blue Light program is actually specifically for emergency services. And he's the Mind Blue Light inspector and the national police lead on that. And I'm going to play you his video. Oops, I clicked on the wrong button. I'm going to play you his video now.
Detective Phil Spencer from Cleveland Police. Nearly 20 years service in. Predominantly frontline, but currently at the moment my job title is Wellbeing and Blue Light Inspector or Coordinator, and that's basically trying to support, look after our staff, our police officers and colleagues with their mental and physical health. Two of my sergeants went off different mental health issues. One ended up with PTSD, and one ended up work-related stress. And at that point, I mean, bear in mind this was 6-7 years ago. Didn't know what to do, out of shame, I suppose, embarrassment. It was really difficult, knowing to say the right things, what to say, support, advise, just listen, be there. And I was just, these two great people, great blokes, great cops, just felt the bits in front of me, disintegrated. And I wasn't having it. I needed to learn for myself, and I just thought, this isn't right, we need to do something. At that point, I'd had about 15 years in, and it was just a job. You just got on with it. It didn't matter what you saw, what you went to, what you dealt with. Just part of the job. You went to some awful scene, but then 10 minutes later, you were going to another job. No time to process, no kind of support at the time, because we were just, that was it. We had this shield, we had these uniforms, expected to get on with it. So as a police officer, police inspector, as a bloke, as a dad, just coming to work, putting the uniform on, brave face, that's what we do. That is what we do. You know, leading my team, showing no signs of weakness, going home, taking the uniform off, stepping back into that line at home, just being dad or Phil, felt a bit, could not deal with it. I know that a lot of officers and staff and military services are probably the same. Something's going on at home and they bottle it up, they keep it in there somewhere, because we know we have to come to work and be that professional, that strong person, and show no signs of weakness in front of your team, especially when you're a supervisor. And I've just seen it. So to sum all that up, I just think I'm sick of seeing people, not just in police, but emergency services, just fall to bits with no support. I've seen what isn't available over the years. We've never known so much about the brain as in the last 15 years, particularly the policing brain, because there's not one person in policing or in emergency services that is not affected by trauma. So it's how do we deal with it? How do we cope with it? And what's historically gone on, it's in there somewhere, going around, not processed. And when people retire, they're retiring ill, and that's when they turn to drink or turn to whatever. We need people to retire healthy. Unfortunately, with suicide, with the research and stats that it's saying that every 2 weeks, a police officer or police member of staff is taking their own life. It's not good enough. One is not good enough. 1 per year is not good enough. It's got to be 0. In policing, sickness levels have always been 80% the physical side of it, 20% psychological side of it. And that actually is not the case. It's because people have not been, over the last few years, people have not been felt self enough to say the reasons why that they're actually poorly, because they've got depression or they're struggling with trauma. So them levels have started balancing out now, which is really good. It's not good that people are still poorly, but it's great that people are actually being honest and saying, actually, I haven't got a bad leg, I haven't got a bad knee, I've got severe depression, I've got trauma, I'm getting flashbacks. Because if people are honest, we can get them the right support and hopefully get them right for themselves first, and then get back to work. Information request by a media a couple of years ago, again, all police forces, that physical illnesses had only gone up 4%. Psychological illnesses, 78%. When you think about that, that's a lot. And that was 2 years ago. So can you imagine when anything research done and stats are done after COVID, that's going to shoot up. So like I said, it's always been here. It's always been here for 200 years, but it's only now that people are recognizing, do you know what? Cops and emergency services are just like us. We're humans. We cry. We have emotions, and we need to look after each other a little bit. And that's what we're trying to create here. It's like we have to do our physical first aid training every year, refresh it, mandatory. Put a sling on, do your resuscitation on a dummy, put a ring bandage on heads and stuff, and put a pen on your palm and whatever. We have to do that, and rightly so, because we occasionally do. But we've never had anything about mental health, about ourselves. Yes, we talk a little bit about the public and the Mental Health Capacity Act, the 135, the 136, etc. But we've never had anything, information, training about looking after ourselves. And that's not selfish. And I don't think any forces should see that as being selfish. We've got to look after us. And it's not hard. If we look after our valuable assets, as in police officers and police staff, of course, everything that we do out there to protect vulnerable people and communities is going to be so much better, because we are in a better place physically and mentally. I was coming to work in my uniform, looking after my team, and it was dead easy. dead easy, because I had that uniform on and I'm a police inspector and everyone looked up to me. And I could signpost support in their health or physical or whatever, dead easy. Went home, took that uniform off and absolutely fell to bits. I just couldn't deal with it.
Took that uniform off and absolutely fell to bits. Couldn't deal with it. Very, very impactful statement. So Phil was sick of seeing people fall apart. Suicide rate, 1 officer every other week here in the UK. Now with suicide rates, we need to be very careful because we're not actually gathering them properly. So all of them are incorrect to some extent. Sickness levels are actually mainly about mental health, and mental health, ill health has risen much more than physical ill health. Ginny, any comments?
Yeah, I think that was yet another powerful segment, and it's great to see someone of rank, again, just like James did, putting themselves out there and explaining their own challenges with mental health. And I totally get the putting on the uniform, because when you put on the uniform, suddenly you become invincible because you begin to play that role. So the human being goes away again. But you're right, when that uniform comes off and it's time for the human being, it's a disaster. And talking about the suicide figures, I know that in 2019, Blue Help, which is an American organization, recorded that there were more deaths by suicide amongst police officers than there were officers killed on duty. So that's 228 officers died as a result of suicide because of their job. Criminal.
Any questions, Anya? Okay, the next talker is Professor Brian Weiler. Now, he's a former soldier, former police officer, and he's an academic, and he researches mainly sleep and performance at the Washington State University in the USA. By the way, I challenge any other webinar organizer to bring you the range of accents that I'm bringing you today. I think it's marvelous, if I do say so myself. So, Professor Brian Weiler.
Brian Weiler. I'm a professor emeritus at Washington State University now. Damn near every person is very vulnerable to the effects of fatigue on their performance. Not getting enough sleep affects how well you can think, control your emotions, remember things accurately. It affects your hand-eye coordination. It affects your driving, how you deal with people, how you deal with the people around you and your family. And it also affects how well you can do a complicated job like policing tends to be. And we know now very clearly that police officers, but we also know now, with no questions about it, that shift work and how you organize shift work also has a major impact on your ability to do your job well. It affects your safety. Tired cops don't drive as well. You know, one of the major causes of officer fatalities and injuries in the US is driving. It's not all gunshots and fights and those sorts of things. It affects the safety of the officers. For every officer killed in a traffic collision in the US, we know that roughly 2 civilians die in traffic crashes involving police. So it's also a community issue, and that's part of what's important when we think about this. There is this impact on police, but how tired police are and how ready they are to do the job and capable they are to do the job has a great impact on how they treat people, how they respond to people in the sudden, complex, rapidly changing situations involving many, many people that are terribly difficult to deal with. The basic biology underneath all this is almost every critter, from a fruit fly to a human to a whale to you name it, depends on the same genes as we do to set our clocks and manage this thing that we have that we all need so desperately, which is sleep. We need air, we need water, we need food, we need sleep. Everybody is affected by fatigue. People do vary in how much sleep they need, but almost everyone needs at least 6 hours of sleep a night in order to get enough rest to do well the next day on their job. They do better if they get more sleep, up to the 8 hours, 8.5 hours mark. And over the course of a career, working those night shifts are one of the most difficult and dangerous shifts to work from a health standpoint and from a performance decrement standpoint. The difficulty with that is that if you work any overtime whatsoever, you end up being awake for more than 17 hours at a time, often driving home when you've been awake for 17 or more hours. And that means you're impaired. Your impairment in a number of important characteristics is as impaired as if you were blowing a 0.08 blood alcohol content. So not a good thing in policing.
Not a good thing in policing at all. If you're awake for more than 17 hours at a time, your performance is equivalent to that of someone who's blowing 0.08 in blood alcohol. So it's actually going to be during Brian's second session in the second part of the webinar that the competition question is going to be based on. So pay attention, especially when you're seeing him again. Driving is one of the main causes of officer fatalities. And for every police officer dying in a car crash, 2 civilians die as well. So that affects the community. You shouldn't be awake more than 17 hours a day. So think about that when you're thinking about your shift, your commute to and from work and life, your social life, your social responsibilities. Ginny, where are you? Any comments?
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that, to be honest, Suzanne. I think exactly what the professor's saying there is absolutely spot on. Having been a roads policing officer for more than 10 years, I know what it's like to drive and to have to drive at speed when you're fatigued. And it can be scary.
Exactly. Right. So now we come to the second part of the webinar, the solution. So we're going to hear the same speakers, but talk about tools and ways out of it. And this is what's going to make up the content of the free poster that you're going to be sent if you're registered for the webinar. If you're still registering now, you can still register now. Right. Okay. So the first one, again, is Amy Boudreau.
Mindfulness, meditation and yoga, some people might think, well, what does that have to do with policing? For me, I feel like it has a lot to do with policing because, we're constantly putting our minds and bodies in a state of heightened awareness. We're constantly in the fight or flight response because we're dealing with really high stressful calls. We're constantly in these states, and what can happen over time is our minds and bodies, our nervous system that can end up being our default state where we're constantly in that state and we don't know how to come back down to a balanced, baseline. So the idea of practicing these modalities, we're actually training and rewiring our brains and nervous system to become more calm, be able to manage our physiological symptoms while we're in these high stressful states. And ultimately, when you're direct experiencing and you can do that, you're going to perform better because you got mental clarity, your situational awareness is going to go up. These are great modalities to practice how to self-regulate and really kick in that parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to really calm our nerves down and allow us to respond as opposed to just react in the situation.
Well, she makes a great point here. People don't usually see what the point is of yoga and mindfulness. I invented a new thing there. Maybe there is Moga, or maybe somebody's starting it. But it makes complete sense biologically. So as a police officer, as we said in the beginning, you're constantly on high alert, fight or flight. You're in a stress response constantly. Mindfulness and yoga and other relaxation techniques get you out of that. So it's very, very related to policing. It's very relevant to policing and it's very important for policing. What do you think, Jenny?
Yes, totally. I mean, just something as simple as a breathing exercise where you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and breathe out for 8. That actually is your body's way of telling your bodyguard, the stress response, step down, guys, I don't need you, everything's fine. So even just having that as a tool at that immediate moment when you're in that heightened state of stress is a great tool to use. And I think the more that we incorporate that, the more that we take that on, the happier and healthier we'll be. And I would just say to some of the cops out there who think it's all a bit pink and fluffy, guys, seriously, this can help you.
Yeah, let's see what James Ravenall has to say, what we should be doing.
Education on the benefits of a good sleep. So that's concentration, alertness, creativity, decision making, health, attention, social skills, improved problem solving, all things that are key for police officers and police staff. Poor sleep, you've got your mood changes, your stress, your levels of anger, your tendency to rely on prescription drugs or non-prescribed drugs, and tired people are massively stressed. As you come on to nights, you hoped that you'll go to bed maybe about 7, 8 o'clock. There are things that you can do on the way home. Wear sunglasses, for example. Don't let your eyes get used to the daylight. Don't drink caffeine too late. I always try to stop drinking caffeine at 12 noon or at midnight, just so the caffeine was out of my system. Try not to use too many stimulants before you go to bed, the usual stuff. Don't go on electrical devices, don't overstimulate your brain, don't start jobs, don't exercise too late because it raises your body temperature and then you will struggle. Try and keep your room cool. Try and you wear earplugs if you can as well. Let your family know what's going on in terms of your sleeping patterns. Don't arrange for any deliveries that are going to come, and just really prep for your night shifts and what's going on. The organisation has a moral responsibility to mitigate the threats that we've talked about already, and I'd say they need to do that through education and awareness. But I think individuals as well, we are not excusing individuals of their responsibilities. The organisations have an obligation to provide the education that's necessary, but personally, people need to live correctly, manage time correctly, eat correctly, prepare themselves in the best condition for their work. And as you change, share your problems and adapt and take the learning.
Yeah, so some very helpful tips there on how to manage sleeping and shift work. And we need education on that. We need to tell officers how to handle night shifts. If we're telling them how to drive a police car, why are we not telling them how to handle shifts? Ginny.
Yeah, I mean, some great insights there, some very practical tips there from James. And also, I love the whole thing about the collective responsibility for our mental health. For sure, the organisation has got responsibility, but each and every one of us has got responsibility for ourselves as well. So it's about working together as a collective and getting this thing managed.
Yep. Let's hear Dr. Jacqueline Drew again.
There's a number of things that we know at an individual level seem to have quite good evidence and seem to work well in policing. So we know that resiliency, training and resiliency work with police is really quite effective. So the ability to cope with and recover from those negative workplace stresses, particularly traditional trauma, resiliency is useful for. So it provides a way to combat stress and be better prepared for the stress you're inevitably going to experience as a police officer. There's also some really good research around positive psychology. Positive psychology teaches us the power of shifting our perspective. So learning more optimism, learning more gratitude, and the simple actions of having optimism and gratitude can actually shift our perspective and the outcomes we experience in terms of well-being and psychological health quite significantly. But when I think about positive psychology, I know that we have a real challenge in policing to implement these interventions, which if we're successful in implementing them, I think they'll have good outcomes. The reason I say it's a challenge is that the policing culture is so much characterised by negativity and pessimism. So introducing a positive psychology frame perhaps is even more of a challenge than in most other organisations because of the cultural overlay that we have in policing. We also know that middle managers are likely to be the ones with the poorest well-being and mental health in our organisations. So given the fact they have such a large and impactful responsibility in policing, we really need first to take care of our middle managers and our middle leaders, those that are in the middle of the organisation that have such strong responsibility. So we need to care and support them. and we firstly need to help them with their well-being. It's only then, I believe, that we can then approach those middle managers and ask them and educate them and train them to be better leaders and ask them to support the troops that are below them. Much of what's driving police well-being is within our control. We can't control trauma. We can make police officers resilient. We certainly can eliminate the major source of harm, and that's our organisations itself and the people that create those organisations.
So interesting that it's the resilience training and positive psychology that can really help. And obviously working on the organization to remove those organizational stresses that the poor leadership puts on them. And I find it interesting that everything that is making things bad in policing and mental health is that macho stuff. And everything that is making things better is what we used to call pink and fluffy, but it's actually maybe just a better skill set that we're only now recognizing slowly that humans need. Ginny.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to get every officer and every member of staff educated around stress and mental health. I think we need to give them the tools and techniques they need to become more resilient. And for sure, middle managers absolutely need to be better equipped to handle officers who come to them who are struggling and are having problems. For sure, my experience wasn't great with middle managers, and this is no criticism of them. The organisation has not given them the tools they need. So I think it's lead from the front. Let's give everybody in the organisation what they need, but particularly look at the middle managers so they are better equipped to support their staff and point them into the right direction.
Let's hear what Rob Hosking has to say.
Each month, an outside person, not a supervisor, not a colleague or anything, an outside individual should come in, and you should be made to speak to them about how your shifts have been going, how you are mental health wise. We need to get rid of this taboo and this stigma about asking someone, is your mental health okay? You know, we're quick enough to ask my colleague, you all right, how you getting on? And they're quick enough to be like, yeah, fine, or whatever. But we need to start asking the question, is how's your mental health today? You know, after seeing that incident, are you all right? We can talk about it. Yes, I understand the police force has to desensitize some situations. Completely understand that. However, we can't desensitize the situation to the extent where you're not even willing to talk about your mental health because of it. You know, you need to be able to desensitize the situation during it, because yes, we have to deal with difficult situations and you need to be the support for other people. But when we go back into the office and it's just the police, let's be the support for each other, because you still need support for being support to someone else. Just because I've supported someone else doesn't now mean I have to carry that macho thing the whole way through to when I get home and I'm like, oh well, that's on my shoulders and I have to deal with it. No, let's talk about it. Let's have a group space to be able to talk about, that was difficult, wasn't it? And let's talk about mental health rather than just moving on from it and never speaking about mental health and how it made someone feel. And the police just do not give you the opportunity to do that. In terms of the culture is a culture where you cannot show vulnerability in the police. You just can't.
Yep. So we need to be able to let people show the vulnerability. So each month have a checkup to see how you're doing mentally. He's suggesting someone external. Again, I think it would be good if people can choose if they want someone internal or external. You never know what the preference might be. Desensitizing is necessary, but you need to be able to switch that off when you're dealing with your own life and with your colleagues, and create opportunities to encourage colleagues to speak to each other after an event. And we need to get that right. What do you think, Ginny?
Yeah, I think mandatory medical mental health checkups are great. The likelihood of that happening every month, I think, is close to zero. I think the one thing that we've not addressed today is the fact that budget is going to be a limiting factor. All I would say to the chief police officers and to politicians, because they're the ones that set budgets, is that you cannot afford not to invest in this area. Do it at your peril, because your officers are on their knees and they need support and they need it now. Minimum once a year mandatory, but they should have access to mental health support without restriction.
Yeah, somebody actually put something in the comment a while ago about having done a freedom of information request to all 43 forces here in the UK, and it was something like, what, 500,000 days of police work lost. So, you know, when you hear complaints by decision makers about budgets, just ask them to tally up how much they're actually spending on officers who can't turn up to work, who are retiring based on ill health. Actually, if you do the figures, I think it would be a lot more feasible and a lot more value for money to actually keep our officers healthy and get them back healthy rather than just having them off. Because, like, we spoke to 2 police officers today who retired, who had to leave after 3 or 5 years. How much did it cost to recruit others and train them up again, get a new uniform, get new equipment? It's a lot more expensive not to look after people. Let's hear what Dr. Marla Friedman has to say.
We are very strong on the mental health check-in. So this means that the department has to, you know, break through that stigma, and the chief has to say, we have a mandatory mental health check-in, meaning every year, well, once a year at least, you go and see a vetted provider, and you can talk about whatever you want. And what I explain when I'm training is I go, the purpose of the mental health session is that you get to know somebody and build a relationship. Because if you're in a crisis or you're involved in a shooting, the chances of you going online and just looking up a name out of the blue, it's just not going to happen. So I may have trained somebody 4 years ago, and then they're involved in a shooting, and they maybe come for the mental health check-in and they know me, then they'll call me. Whereas I know if they didn't know me or someone like me, they would just kind of sit on it, and it gets worse and worse over the years. So I developed a program called Chiefs Lead the Way. And what I tell chiefs is, here's the thing, I want you to go for mental health check-in, and then I want you to go back to the department, go to roll call, say, hey, I had a check-in, and guess what? No problem. We just chatted, it was all good. And I'd like you all to go. And the thing about the mental health check-in is there's no report. Nothing goes back to the department, because that's their fear. They have in-house, but most cops won't use their in-house EAP, employee assistance programs. They just don't trust it. So we really push for going to an outside provider. And so the Chiefs Lead the Way program, if the chief goes, then it doesn't feel as maybe punitive. I don't know really, or stigmatized. So if they're coming back to the department and talking about it in really kind ways, please, then we get a lot of calls. And we're thrilled. And a lot of them, surprisingly, you would think they come for the one session and out. I can't tell you the percentage that just stay for therapy. Once they get their foot in the door, they're like, hey, by the way, while I got you, I'm having problems with my marriage, or my kids got ADD, or how do I handle X, Y, and Z? So it's always based on the relationship for us. And so that's the underlying vision, is break the stigma and build a relationship. Cops are used to cortisol and adrenaline, you know, just burning up their systems. So I teach them how to release oxytocin at will. I teach them distraction exercises. I also find relaxation. Some want it on tape, some I just teach and they're able to do. I send them for meditation. You know, the system is hyper aroused. And so the more control we can get over that, and the more the officer has control over that, the more comfortable and the more powerful they feel. And once you learn all of the anxiety management skills, well, then you're ready to go. And so that's the best part of it. And I wish in every police academy, they'd have someone in right in the beginning, teach them all of it, so that they enter their career with those in their bag. If they have something more serious, then I have specialized training in prolonged exposure. I'll be honest with you, I was shocked how well it worked. I had officers and federal agents that came in who had trauma for 6 years, 8 years, 10 years more, and they just lived with it. They didn't sleep. They were couldn't eat, or overate, or smoked, drank, became alcoholics, substance abusers, gamblers, you name it. all the things that happen when you don't deal with what's going on in here. That, you know, people don't realize what that is. I want them to feel empowered, that they own these skills, because frankly, we should all have them. Look what's going on now. I mean, I'm seeing people again that I hadn't seen in so long, based on the pandemic. What I realized in session was, particularly with officers, not only, but we have to do a very in-depth evaluation because of suicide risk. So now they don't want to go to the hospital. So they're balancing that with, well, if I tell her, then what's going to happen? And where's this going to go? So when I ask about suicidal ideation or thoughts, and then I ask about, do you have plans? And do you have intention? So what I tell them is, let me ask you something. I go, if you had to commit suicide, and of course you don't, what method would you use? Because you said you never thought about it even. And they said, well, if I had to, well, I don't know. I said, well, would you set yourself on fire? Like, no. I go, would you hang yourself? No. Would you shoot yourself? Probably. Would you go in the garage and turn the car on? No, I don't think so. So then I say, well, see, now we started with no when I asked you about suicide, but now we know, just like everybody else, at some point in our head, we may never plan to do it. Most people don't kill themselves, but we do think when we hear about it, geez, I don't know if I would do that or that. So what I tell them is, now that you told me that, I know this is an open discussion for us now. So when you tell me you're having thoughts, it doesn't mean that you're going to act on those. It tells me your level of depression, how upset you are, how your functioning is being impacted. So what I'm asking you is, don't automatically say no, because we all have those thoughts. And I had to think to myself, well, what would I do if I had some therapists that I train, I say, be careful how you ask the question. You don't want to say, like, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Because what you're asking them to say is no. And then you miss the opportunity to gather that information. So obviously most will never do it, but some will, and some will tell you how, and you'll know more about that. And also, once you open that discussion, then they know they can say to me, Doc, I was thinking about it. I thought it would just be quick and I'd be done, but then it would devastate my family, and they'd lose my pension if they knew it was suicide. So then they start talking about it, and that's what I need. I need for them to talk about it, and then I can see where the symptomology is and how deep the depression is, or any other issues, and then we can focus on those as well. So that's where I developed the no doesn't always mean no concept, because everyone obviously knows the other one. Most of that work, internet crimes against children, or we call it ICAC here, they're in a bad situation, really. What I've come up with are some ways for them to manage some of the imagery. So imagine looking, like you said, you're seeing videos of the worst a human could do to another human, and that human's a child. And if they have children, it's devastating. So they have to find some way to defend themselves. So I tell them, when they're looking at that, remember what their job is. It's to identify the victim, the perpetrator, or the location, depending on what piece you don't know. And if the information is so overwhelming, slow it down. Don't watch it in video. Take single shots. Minimize it. Make the picture smaller. Stand away from it. I say, don't fall in. Don't fall in, because then it's difficult to do the job. But what most people don't realize is it interferes with family life. It interferes with their marriage. Imagine them seeing this all day, and to be frank, then when they go to have intercourse with their partner, the images pop in their head, but they never tell their spouse. The other thing I tell them is, if you're watching the video, turn off the audio. Then listen to the audio and turn off the video, because the whole thing at one time is really overwhelming. And it's easier to get the information if you split it in half. And so they report back, you know what, that is a little bit easier. Frankly, most of the officers I work with are just outstanding. And my concerns about not having treatment, not having somewhere to go, not having tools or a toolbox means that their life will be shortened, that they'll have problems with alcohol. There's 35% increased risk of cardiac problems with officers. I mean, they eat poorly, they eat fast food. There's just a lot of re-education that has to go into it.
Some really, really good hands-on advice and steps from Dr. Marla Friedman, exactly how I like it. So the mandatory health check-in, the reason why I think and agree that it has to be mandatory, because then nobody can wiggle out of it. You know, Rob Hoskin was talking earlier about that trim email you may get after an incident. Well, if people can choose to ignore that, they might feel pressured to ignore it by the still existing macho culture. If it's mandatory, you don't have a choice, you go. And chiefs lead the way. I think this is a fantastic concept. If your police chief tells the whole organization, okay, I've struggled with this. I've seen things that made me cry. I've seen this, I've seen that, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't talk to anyone. You know, I couldn't respond to my children. This gives you permission to talk about these things yourself, because you're never going to see your chief as weak, you know. So it's so important that chiefs do this. And the mandatory health check-in, you know, so Rob was suggesting once a month. Some others suggest once a year. I don't know, work out what works best for you. Relaxation techniques, again, she was talking about. And that somebody should teach these skills in the police academy. So we need these from the beginning, from the word go. And then he was the practical advice I promised to that police officer from Bangladesh earlier about viewing indecent images. So again, very practical advice. Ginny, over to you.
Yeah, I just think it was a great segment, some really, really insightful information from Marla and some very, very useful practical tips. I can't add any more to that. It was great.
Okay, let's see what Dr. Yvonne Taylor suggests.
Practices are important. Stress management, avoidance of too much alcohol, techniques and scheduling time for sleep as a priority. So some really simple techniques such as blackout blinds, trying to lie in before later shifts or before night shifts, strategic napping, for example, letting family and friends have your work schedule, asking them not to ring or turning your phone off. Sleep is really important for well-being and for physical and mental health. I think we all know that a good night's sleep seems to make everything seem a bit better and a bit brighter. So let's just prioritise some good old-fashioned sleep. Some fairly recent research has shown that in order to get proper rest and recuperation, we do need to switch off fully from work.
Yep, we need to get proper rest, prioritize sleep, and also make sure the family knows about it. Sleep hygiene, you know, James Ravenall has talked about that as well. Very important. What do you think, Ginny?
Yeah, absolutely. Minimum, preferably 8 hours of good quality uninterrupted sleep. Have your bedroom temperature at 16 to 18 degrees. Have the blackout blinds. If you're coming off a night shift and it's sunshiny or not even sunshiny and it's light, get the sunglasses on. We're not talking about the police Ray-Ban things. We're just saying get some sunglasses on, cut out the blue light, avoid the phone, anything that emits blue light, because that's the one that's all related to your body. That's the thing that wakes you up. Try and get away from the noise. Sleep in a quiet part of the house. Have a word with the wife or your partner about taking the kids out, maybe even put the dog out to doggy daycare. And just like James suggested, try and avoid getting things delivered to the house. It's about trying to do the best that you can do to make sure that you get the best quality sleep you can.
Okay, and Scott Sophie from Illinois is going to talk to us about the peer support program, which is something internal. I think it's a little bit similar to the blue light program that we have in here with trained volunteers, but it seems to be really good for some.
Program started here at the Evanston Police Department in the year 2006, so we've had it now for 15 years. There had been a marked rise in suicides in law enforcement, unfortunately, throughout the states in many of the years preceding the start of our program. We were taught about peer support by the Chicago Police Department, and Chicago has a very robust and large peer support program with over 400 police officers that are volunteer members. So we had in 2006, 19 members of our police department were trained for 1 full week by one member of the Chicago Police Department, as well as his partner, who is a federal law enforcement officer who provided peer support to some of the federal agencies here in the States. The program began due to the concern over suicide and general officer wellness. And what we were looking to do was learn how we can provide support for our officers, for our civilian members, as well as their family members, should there be a crisis on the job or off the job that we could assist with if someone didn't know where to turn to get proper help. So the program entails on our end, we have our volunteer members that volunteer 2 weeks at a time. We have them pair up so that there's always a partner, and they are on call should there be any need arising for an issue on or off duty. Some of the on-duty issues that could potentially involve peer support would involve an officer-involved shooting, a significant injury to an officer, a very grotesque crime, death of a child, or any of the other things that would be, something well out of the ordinary realm of what we would do on a day-to-day basis. Outside of work, however, officers can suffer from depression, officers can suffer from addiction, struggle with alcohol issues, go through financial issues, go through divorce issues. And, so instead of going somewhere to meet a brand new person, someone that you don't feel you can trust, someone that you don't feel will understand the stressors that come with a job in law enforcement, we believe that having a peer support program and having the ability for these officers to come and confidentially speak to their own peers, it may make them more willing to open up and get themselves help, especially when they need it. One of the largest skill sets that's important if you're going to be a peer support member is active listening. You could have all the best advice in the world, but if you don't have a true understanding of what is causing concern for the member or their family member who have reached out to assist you, then it's really hard to provide the proper support. So we have a phone number, an email address, as well as posters throughout various areas of the police station to let folks know about our program and how they can reach out to contact us. Our police family members are also aware of the program. We created a 2-page pamphlet, color document that we sent to the homes of all of the officers so that they could discuss what the program is with their family members and make them aware of it. If a family member were to reach out to us for help for themselves or for their family member who would be our fellow officer, they can expect that we are willing to come and meet with them in person or speak with them over the phone, determine what the issue may be, and provide some advice and or resources as to how they can help rectify that issue. So initially, when starting off a program like this and knowing how hesitant officers are to talk about their personal struggles, one of the biggest issues was buy-in or credibility. Is this really going to help? Is it really going to work? But more than anything, are the officers really going to keep their mouths shut? We can be a very gossipy group of people, and that makes for great friendships. But also, when it comes down to it, and it's no longer a joke, and someone really does need help, we need the members to understand that we'll take that seriously and be quiet, and just provide the help. One thing that's been useful that developed over time was basically a mutual aid concept, where as peer support became a growing concept in our neighboring police agencies and those agencies became trained in peer support, we're able to network with each other to where if there is a major incident or an incident where an officer at one agency may not feel comfortable speaking to their own coworkers, we've made it so they're aware that they can reach out and we can at least assist in providing a connection to a peer support member from another agency where they may not be as concerned with the confidentiality factors and the gossip factors, etc. I think after 15 years of doing this, though, and helping so many officers in their time of need, the credibility has increased because we've proven that we are not talking about this. We're strictly here to get help and to care for the membership. So we've seen a wonderful impact with this program. We don't really keep hard statistical data, and that's actually kind of the point. We're not pressured by our administration, by our chief of police, to give any form of an annual report or any data to it. I believe fully that we have the support of our administration. They know the effectiveness of the program, and they know how important it is for both the officers and the organization. I think there's a decrease in liability when you have healthy police officers coming to work, and it's wonderful that they let us do that without really asking questions. By keeping this program's oversight and management in the hands of patrol officers, it decreases the potential for conflict of interest with a supervisor becoming aware of an issue that, even though the goal is confidentiality for peer support, that supervisor may have other rules and regulations that they're bound by from the agency to report an issue that they become aware of.
Okay, some really, really good points in there. So one was it's internal. Some people might feel very comfortable with that. It can be confidential because you can go to neighboring departments. The bosses don't ask for any KPIs, key performance indicators. That's also quite interesting, although an evaluation would always be good, because if another department wanted to maybe introduce that, they might want to know, what is the outcome of it? And it's patrol officers who are in charge, so it's not supervisors. So that's very interesting. Jing, do you have any observations?
Yeah, I think it's a great scheme. I think we should do a lot more of it. I think the fact that they're not reporting back to the organisation is a great bonus. It's also a credibility factor that they're dealing with their own peers who understand the job that they're struggling with. I think interagency work would be great. It doesn't necessarily have to stay in the police service. You could look at other emergency services and be able to support each other's agencies, so that if a cop doesn't feel comfortable speaking to anybody in the police, they can access a hub where they can speak to another emergency responder who can help them through.
If you're getting the impression I'm rushing through this a little bit now, I am. It's already running later than I had intended to keep you all. Apologies for that. But the content is so good, and the videos are so vital. I really want you guys all to see them. So Sam Smith and his Green Ribbon campaign.
He's asking for a national standard, so a mandatory national standard to be set, and there to be an element of accountability, and that is actually set in law. There's no sort of legal accountability. If there was, we wouldn't be seeing what we see now, which is a lack of recording and a lack of understanding around mental illness in policing. At the moment, we've got a national wellbeing program which was set up, I think, with some government money, which is fine, but it doesn't actually help everybody, because not everyone uses it. Forces don't have to use it. It's there as if you would like to use it and invest with it, you can, but it's not mandatory. And I think the fact that mandatory training is given for all police officers in physical well-being from day one. So why are we not mandatory training people on their mental health as well? It's about accountability. It's about safety for not just the officers, but the public they serve. We've got a ridiculously high rate of officers suspected with PTSD. They think 1 in 5, so a fifth of the police force currently have PTSD. PTSD is a serious illness. It causes loss of control, which is dangerous to the public. It causes permanent brain damage, loss of memory. It also causes an increased chance of suicide, and that's why we expect about every officer every 2 weeks takes their own life. And it's all about the aftermath of once you've got ill, but there's not much about preventing getting ill in the first place. And I always see it as, we're not being given the tools to succeed. You wouldn't let an officer go to a violent job without a stab-proof vest. If we started saying we're not paying for them because they're expensive, so off you go, and then they get stabbed, that's their problem. That just sounds barbaric, but effectively we are doing exactly that with psychological well-being. We are forcibly making officers attend trauma after trauma after trauma, knowing the psychological effect on the human brain of constant trauma will lead to things like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, yet we are not giving them any prevention or resilience training prior in their initial training to help prevent that from happening. And I don't say just at the beginning, that should be ongoing. That should be every 6 months minimum, because we are every 6 months checking officers that they're able to complete a level of fitness, and that is for safety reasons. So why aren't we doing it for their psychological well-being? And that's really what I'm trying to accomplish through this campaign.
So I'd like to declare here now that Police Science Doctor fully supports the Green Ribbon Policing campaign. National Wellbeing Program it's great, but because it's not mandatory, again, that might discourage a few people from using it. So Sam is asking for a mandatory standard, not only to deal with existing issues, but also to prevent them, so that police really look after their staff. I love this. You wouldn't send an officer to a dangerous situation without a stab vest and then say, well, if you got injured, that's your problem. We're doing that. We're doing that with their mental health. Ginny.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, Susanna. I love that. And I totally agree with Sam that it's something that we need to get in place. And the sooner the better. Let's start being proactive rather than reactive. Let's safeguard the health and well-being of our officers and staff.
Okay, Dr. Barbara Pavlo.
People have used EAP, which is Employees Assistance Unit, EAU is what we call it, and people have thought we'll keep confidentiality. Even though as a police psychologist, even though I'm employed by the LAPD, I still have to adhere to the rules and regulations of the American Psychological Association, which is keeping everything confidential with the regular exceptions of harm to self, harm to others, child or elder abuse. So they've tried it, and because the professional that they have seen has not been schooled in police psychology, they don't really understand the specific demands, the specific needs of somebody who is in law enforcement. So it usually is a no-go, it doesn't work, and then they eventually come to Behavioral Science Services, which is BSS, part of the LAPD, and they see us where they feel understood, where the spouse can better understand the moods or the experiences that their significant other is having as being in law enforcement. And the other thing is there is no end. They could see us as many times as necessary. And sometimes there's a crisis and they come back after 3 years. They could come back whenever they want. It's a revolving door. We're here for them. And I think it's worked out very, very well. People always call psychologists a shrink. And I always tell all my patients, no, I'm not a shrink, I'm actually an expander. Because you see things this way, but as an expander, I broaden your whole perspective. I show you what I see back here, what I see here, what I see here. And as an expander, you get to see the full picture, 3D picture of what you're experiencing, so you can make a better decision.
I love that, and I think that's really interesting with the expander. And somebody put something into the comments earlier about the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, where you get a few hours, a few sessions with someone, and they said people usually spend the first three or four of those sessions explaining what the job is and what the organizational demands are. So obviously, Ginny, you're very familiar with this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was interesting that Barbara reiterated the fact that, you know, if you have no experience of law enforcement, it's very, very difficult to get that credibility with your client, that they will sit and talk to you about what's troubling them. And I think the whole expansion of your mind is absolutely perfect. It's about empowering someone to be self-aware so that they can make the decisions that work for them.
Yeah. Phil Spencer next.
So I coordinate the Blue Light Programme, Mind Blue Light Programme within Cleveland Police, and I suppose locally and regionally and a bit nationally as well. So we are trying to create, and a lot of other people are, and organisations are trying to create a safer environment for their staff and colleagues to reach out and ask for help. It's about early prevention and early intervention, because a lot of us would it's just our job. That's how I'm supposed to feel. We are going to some abnormal events daily, traumatic events daily, and we just think it's normal, but it's not. You know, stats and research, etc. General members of public would see or deal with 4 traumatic incidents in their lifetime. 4 traumatic incidents. Police officers, police staff, emergency services, between 600 to 800 traumatic incidents. Now that's a lot of trauma. But historically, that's just our jobs, get on with it. But I think now it's finally recognised and realised that it's not just a job. We are humans too. This is our lives. We need to understand and how to deal with trauma, process it a little bit more to be able to keep people safe and keep people healthy and well at work. So yeah, I'm a warranted cop, but dealing with what's traditionally, I suppose, been a police staff role or another emergency services staff role. But we're hoping, or I'm hoping as well, that there's some credibility, because I've been there, seen it, done it, type of thing. I've dealt with it as a PC, I've dealt with it as a sergeant, I've dealt with it as inspector for myself, but more importantly, seen the aftermath of my team, tried to support my team, and have been to an amount of incidents, if that makes sense. So there's nobody in the policing world could point at me and say, well, what do you know about this because you haven't done it? Well, actually I have. And I think that's the credibility. I think that's what's kind of a little bit working for us. At Cleveland, we've got nearly 150 blue light champions, mine blue light champions. So they all got their day jobs. So that could be a detective sergeant, and then response inspector, a police manager, police staff, driver training, front desk. It matters not. Rank has no structure within wellbeing in the blue light program. Okay, so got nearly 150 blue light champions who all do their day job, but be a blue light champion voluntary because they want to support their colleagues about their mental and physical and wellbeing, about the mental health as well. So I coordinate all them. I do training with them. So when the blue light program was first around, I was lucky enough to do a trainer course with them. So I can deliver courses about the blue light program and how to look after people with the mental health in policing, recognise the signs, etc. Another part of my job is, and again, we're kind of, lucky, I suppose we're one of the first forces in the country to be delivering bespoke first aid mental health training. So myself and one of the counsellors, so it's a great combination. You know, we're very different. I'm a police inspector, a police officer. Amy is a force counsellor, in-house force counsellor, but we still deliver the same message. So we are delivering mandatory training, so everybody will have it at some point, and it's just going to be day-to-day business. Everybody will have it. Everyone will have to do a refresher. So at the moment, we're doing all supervisors. They're doing a 2-day first aid mental health training, all Ofqual accredited. So that gives people a little bit more understanding about different illnesses, how to signpost, how to start a supportive conversation, how to keep people safe if they're in immediate crisis. And we give them an opportunity to show what's available internally or externally. We actually don't care where people go for help, as long as you go for help if you need help. You know, yes, we've got an internal department, we've got a fab wellbeing team, we have occupational health nurses, we have 2 force counsellors full-time in-house. We can get pretty much immediate support, but we're not naive enough to think some of our staff and officers won't want to come internally because of previous years gone by, or they don't want to disclose anything that's confidential, and that's absolutely fine because there's loads of stuff out there. Police treatment centres, Police Care UK, Just Be, Samaritans, you name it. There is loads of external organisations for emergency services staff. Yeah. So we've got to break that stigma. We've got to reach people that before they get to that point, they can reach out and ask for help and ask. And if we can create this safe environment with more blue light champions, more first aid mental health, more trim practitioners, everything like that, then the more opportunity we'll have of saving. And as dramatic as it sounds, all of them people have just said they could save somebody's life by just listening to somebody if they reach out for help. So we do stuff like that. We do what's called a Wellbeing Wednesday when we can, when COVID's gone. It's basically a drop-in surgery. We just go around different headquarters within our organisation where anybody can come and speak to us, come and speak to the nurses, come and speak to the counsellors, come and speak to me, come and speak to a couple of blue light champions. We just need to open it up so people feel confident. A lot of our guest speakers are men, strong men, who are in uniform, who will turn up and quite happy just tell their story, and you can hear a pin drop. It is nothing better than listening to one of our own in uniform getting up in front of an audience and just telling their lived experience, and it's absolutely amazing. We have created such a better environment over the last 5 years, and the feedback we get, all the feedback about courses, is the best part of the course is listening to that cop in uniform. Used to be in dog section, for example, for 14 years, thought it was hard as nails. He comes and tells his story, and it's just, and that's we get messages saying just thanks. It's really good to see that a lot of people are now coming up and just talking about stuff.
So that's very interesting. So I think this is one of the only places where I actually think it's better to have, or it's very important to have a male heading this up, because it needs to be shown that this is not all pink and fluffy. And I don't usually say this, but I think in order to identify with them, we need to show them those strong men who talk about their mental health. Ginny.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think Phil and his team are doing a fantastic job. The fact that they're rolling out mental health first aid training is fantastic, and that it's going to be compulsory for everyone. It absolutely goes with how I feel, and there is nothing greater that can get a message across than someone who can speak about their own life experience, particularly if they've done the job. I think it's great.
Yeah, and we've got 2 more sessions, and actually this one that we're going to play now is the one that's going to have the answer to the question we're going to ask you for the competition. So listen up.
We've worked out mathematical models now that can minimize the harm done. And we know that we can do a lot better job of scheduling when people start, which officers start on what shifts, at what times, and still balance that with the need to have enough people on duty to do the job that the community needs. But the science doesn't necessarily match what people want. In the US, a large proportion of officers want to work 12-hour shifts. But the 10-hour shifts and the 8-hour shifts, and not to leave our colleagues in Italy out, the 6-hour, the 6 days, 6 hours a day shift, all give you ways so everyone can get enough sleep if they're conscientious about it. You shouldn't be awake for more than 17 hours a day. If you're, is the hard part. By the time you hit your 17th hour awake, that's when you're starting to have, depending on the time of day and how much light there is and all these other things that are relevant. But if you've been up and about for more than 17 hours, you're starting to degrade in terms of your performance ability. More than 8 hours on a graveyard shift, ideally, you wouldn't have. It really is your duty to tell everybody to leave you alone, if at all possible, unless it's an emergency, so you can get enough sleep. So day in and day out, you can do your job safely and stay healthy and manage the job.
So the competition question is, and the first person to email me on contact@policesciencedoctor.com, the question is, what is the maximum length that a graveyard shift or a night shift should be biologically? So please email me that, and you can win the emergency stress pit stop. Right, so we've got one more session, and it's Melanie Aitken. You haven't heard from her in the first part because everything she's saying is actually so productive as a solution. They've got this fantastic online system for their police officers in New Zealand. I'm going to play you this now.
Mel Aiken, and I'm the Director of Safer People for New Zealand Police. So I'm a superintendent, and I'm responsible for looking after the health and safety and well-being and a few other things for our organisation of 14,000 plus employees. So we've got a fairly comprehensive wellness team that's stretched across our 12 districts across New Zealand, and that comprises a wellness manager and a wellness advisor within each of those districts, and 2 team leaders. So our wellness advisors are all registered health professionals, ranging from mental health nurses to counsellors, occupational therapists, and social workers. So they're like a triage system for our both constabulary and non-constabulary to identify if they need just a check-in with the wellness advisor, or they actually need referral through to a clinical psychologist, which we have access to hundreds on contract throughout the country, dependent on what the need is. We also have a chaplaincy service that supports our wellness team, which is just as a supplement or alternate to people not necessarily wanting to see a wellness advisor, but seeking some support or advice through a chaplain. What we have identified more recently is the need to actually drive a real prevention, proactive response to our people's health and safety and well-being. So it's like the ambulance at the top of the cliff rather than at the bottom. And so we developed a health and safety and wellbeing strategy, which is now Safer People, which is the team that I lead. And that's really something quite, I say new, but it's really, I guess, replicating what we do in our operating strategy for police. So our police operating strategy is prevention first. So we're preventing harm to our communities. And we want to make sure that we replicate that with our own people, because we can't be our very best doing that for our communities if we're not our very best ourselves. So the holistic approach to our people's health and safety and well-being is centric to everything that Safer People do and drive and deliver in terms of initiatives. We always know that there is that need for response. So we have a practice framework of prevent, advise and respond across our 5 work streams. So, but prevention is always the number one thing that we want to be really focused on doing in terms of delivering education, resources, initiatives that are going to keep our people well, rather than having to rely on wrapping services around them once they've demonstrated that they're not so well as a result of the nature of their work and what they've attended. So one of our biggest ways that we wanted to be able to empower and push the prevention approach to well-being was through, so we've called it our Wellness Hub. So in 2019, October, we launched it, and it's a platform, a digital platform, to enable the delivery of prevention advice, support and resources for individuals' well-being. So it's a cloud-based platform, and our employees can access it from anywhere. They don't have to access it off a police computer. And it's also been opened up to families and a very close number of friends of each of our employees. And the real purpose of that is that we know that being as well as you can be at work, it's not about you need your family and social support around you. You need your spiritual well-being, you need your mental, and you need your physical. So having our families being able to access the platform is really great, because they can actually start to see and understand some of the things that our people are I guess being exposed to, and some of the resources that are available to help them with that. So just to talk about the hub more specifically, when you register for it, you fill out a personal health questionnaire, and you receive back what's called a traffic light profile or a scorecard. And so there's a long-term behaviours model that's applied to that, and it's quite, I guess, technical, and I'm only a police officer, I'm not a computer guru, but what that starts doing is pushing particular education resources or articles to you as an employee. It will start sending you challenges that are around motivation, and then we talk about rewards. So participating in challenges that have prizes or outcomes to them as well, to really get you motivated. So based on that wellbeing scorecard that you fill out at the start, you get education, motivation and rewards that are pushed to your page and to your platform, and they're unique to you as a result of your health information, which is pretty exciting. So the employee, every employee, they're encouraged to be sort of self-motivated within the hub. We, as a Safer People or as an organisation, have been very careful about making sure that this is private to the individual, so they feel safe about putting their own information in and getting the resources out. So we cannot view what their specific information says. But what we can do is we can start to see trends and themes that our employees are looking at, engaging in, and joining in with any of the challenges, because that helps us actually look at what some of the themes are that we need to be more focused on, whether it's around sleep because of our shift workers, whether it's around resilience, mental health, nutrition, exercise. And we talk about policifying the web, the Wellness Hub, but we really make it police-centric. So we have a team sitting in behind the hub called Synergy Health, and they develop and put all the main resources on there. But then we work with them to say, this is actually what it is our people want or need in the hub, whether it's specific videos or coaching videos around how to pass your physical competency test, which is what our employees need to do to biannually to remain current for work. So we can create videos, we can create webinars, podcasts, anything that we want to do. We can basically make it ours and make it relevant for our people and also for their families to be engaging in. Sitting in behind Synergy, there's a team of health professionals, so we make sure that what's going on there isn't just plucked out of the internet, but that it's actually evidence-based and it's health-focused information, and it's wide-ranging, so it's not specific to one health professional's view on health or nutrition, which is always a good thing too. We can align the Wellness Hub with national campaigns, whether it's national police campaigns or national campaigns that might be, for example, Breast Cancer Month, men's health, prostate cancer, anything that we think there should be a focus on. We have a national anti-bullying day within New Zealand, so we do a really big drive through the hub around that. And we ask not just our individuals, but our districts to engage in challenges that are going to drive and promote and have them really thinking about their own health and well-being within that. One of the successes we've had to date with it is ensuring that we have our own people telling their stories, and particularly around mental health or a more recent example, we had one of our colleagues shot in the line of duty. So we were able to interview and post some videos that were really dear to the heart of so many, and they were from our colleagues in our front line, talking about what it meant to them, talking about some things that were really personal that, you know, not that long ago, they would never have shared. They wouldn't have felt safe or the courage to do so. But that's where we're really, really wanting to break down that stigma around mental health and have people talk about it, because the more they talk about it, the more likely they're going to engage in help or getting resources early on before it's too late. Just some examples, further examples of the challenges and goals that you can sign up for within the hub. And again, it's self-selected, so you don't have to do any of them, but we often find work groups or teams like to participate in a challenge as a team. So it might be a Sleep Smarter challenge. We have functional fitness, we have resiliency challenges. So I'm currently doing a resiliency challenge, which over the next 10 days, I will get sent every day something around that I need to do or focus on around resiliency, and then at the end of it, I'm not sure what will happen, but I presume it will send me some further tips or education, or hopefully I've learned a whole lot as a result of engaging in that challenge. There's some mindfulness challenges, there's gratitude challenges, and there's nutrition challenges. That's just a very, very small, example of some of the things we have. We also have rewards within the hub and discounts, and police are inherently competitive with each other. So we will put up challenges that districts compete against each other with. And they can be up for receiving small token rewards at the end of them, whether it's gift vouchers or things that they can purchase nutrition or health-related products at a discounted price. And that's another part of the hub, is that there's a whole page of providers that give us discounted sports equipment. It might be nutrition, it could be dietary things, it could be going and seeing, getting a mole map done to track your moles for skin cancer, and all things that are given at a discounted rate to really engage our people in. Part of our Safer People health and safety and wellbeing strategy is very much focused on breaking down the stigma around mental health. So at the front and centre of our one-page strategy, we have the phrase, "It's okay to not be okay," and we're very, very genuine about that. We want our people to know that actually feeling a bit rubbish or feeling that you need some help because of what you've been exposed to is actually okay, because it's not normal for normal people to be doing and seeing and dealing with the kinds of things that police see and deal with on a daily basis. So the "it's okay to not be okay" gives people permission to put their hand up and say, actually, I'm not feeling that great today. I do need some help. That's just, it's normal. And so, yes, it's a phrase, but it's much deeper than that, because we want that to be the basis of people really realising that as an organisation, we care for them. We want them to come to work and be their very best, but we know that policing is a pretty tough gig. So you're allowed to not feel so great. You're allowed to, your mental health, it's on a continuum. You're not either good or bad. You're on a continuum, and there'll be days or times when you aren't at your very best, and therefore it's okay to not be okay. But we are there to give you the support and resources that you need to get you back on track.
Thank you very much, the Superintendent Aitken. That's a fantastic system they've got in place there. And I would say that's something that many people can work towards. So that was the last of our talks today. We do have a competition winner. Congratulations. I'm going to contact that person tomorrow. And I'm also going to do the whole poster mail out tomorrow, and I'm going to do the certificates at some point later. We've come to a close. Thanks for staying on. You can still register, because I haven't done the poster and certificate stuff yet. So you can still register at the website that we've been putting in. That's probably on your pad. And Ginny and I, and I'm sure all the speakers would encourage you to share the replay link widely once it's being sent out, because it's a learning experience for me. It's far too much content for a shortish webinar. It's longer than I planned, but actually I had people who wanted to be part of the webinar and be speakers. I think I just need to do a second one. What do you think, Ginny?
Yeah, I think it would be great. And just to add a little bit to Mel's piece there, it's okay to not be okay. It's not okay to stay there. Please reach out to whoever and get the help you need.
Yep. And also, please let us know if there's anything that you want to implement, that you want to discuss with your bosses. Let me know how this is going. I'd like to follow that situation, because if something can be implemented around the world based on what you've seen today, that would be fantastic. That would be such a success for this webinar. This has grown much bigger than Ginny and I have ever thought. And thank you for staying on. I know it's been 3 hours. I'm so sorry. But it's so much fantastic content, and you'll be able to watch this all again. You'll get the poster and everything. Please do something with it, and then let us know what you're doing with it. From Ginny and I, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found this content useful. You can get access to each episode's transcript with key learning points, timestamps, and references if you get yourself onto my mailing list. Just go to the main website on policesciencedoctor.com, and on the bottom of each page you will find a sign-up form for notifications of new content. Just enter your first name, your preferred email address, and the type of organization you work for. You will not get any spam. This is just for me to let you know about new content and for you to get access to all the transcripts.